see the spark in my eye with my sleeplessness, your sleepless caress. And king of all the wild things am I with my sleeplessness, your sleepless caress, your sleepless caress.
Welcome, everybody. This is Richard Sachs, your host on Lost Arts Radio, broadcasting worldwide on this 31st day of, October 2015. It's Halloween. Happy Halloween. I hope that special song that Doug put in wasn't too scary for you. And actually, if it was too scary for you, then you probably would be way too scared of our show tonight, because it's going to be about Agenda 21. And that's actually... it's not, I won't say it's scary, but it's more serious than evil monsters on Halloween, because these evil monsters are actually real. Well, they're actually mostly regular people that think they're evil monsters, but they're doing a pretty good job playing that role, and it's not just their costume. In fact, Halloween has regular kids in evil monster costumes. These are evil monsters in regular people costumes. So it's kind of the opposite. And the reason I don't say it's scary is because, really when you think about it, there aren't any things that are scary. It's your reaction to something that makes it scary. And you can be scared of something that's not particularly scary, and you can be fearless, in which case things that people think are scary won't affect you. And that's absolutely true. It's not a theory. That fear and lack of fear are completely voluntary states. In other words, people think that if something a certain way happens, then you have to be scared. But the secret is that's total nonsense. It's not true. Even if there was a law that you had to be scared, you don't have to follow that one. As far as I know, anyway, at this point in the degeneration of society, you don't. And I recommend not being afraid of things, because it keeps you a lot more effective, and you find out when you try it that, hey, I never had to be scared of anything. That was just my misunderstanding. So with that in mind, and I suspect that playing these little Halloween music things and mentioning Halloween is probably going to get attacked by a lot of people, but I don't really think Halloween's a big threat to humanity, but I think that Agenda 21 is trying to be, because it's definitely intended to destroy any remnants of normal society. And, the two requirements to do anything about it are, first, to be aware of it, to know what it is, to have some understanding of how it's intended to operate, what steps it's going through, how the nice, polite planning people in your community are part of it, whether they know it or not. And the only planning that needs to be done by any level of government is to plan to protect our freedoms. And that doesn't mean, just in case you're not sure, to abandon taking care of our environment, because anybody who is even remotely sane knows that they have to do that. The environment is not just something to be interested in your spare time. It's our life support system on the physical level. So you have to do that. And if you're destroying the environment, then you are intruding on the rights of other people. So you're not supposed to do that. And in fact, you can't. And protecting our freedoms means enforcing the already on the books reasonable and necessary environmental protection laws that we already have, not trying to scare us into having so many new ones that they have to take away all of your normal freedoms with the excuse of protecting the environment, saving the world from climate change, or any such thing. That's all just, intended to fool you into becoming a slave voluntarily, and that, I don't think that's a good idea. So, we have way too many laws already, and we have plenty to take care of things like protecting the environment if they're enforced. And the basic understanding in the U.S. and any place that, is supposed to have freedom for individuals living there, that protecting the present and future freedom of all of the people is the job, primary and possibly the only job in its larger sense of government. Anything else is probably not legitimate. And taking care of the environment is just part of protecting people's freedom, because if you destroy the environment, then you're not really free to have a normal life anyway. So that's already understood. And we don't need a whole new program like Agenda 21 designed to pack everybody into densely packed cities, stated by the originators of this program. Now they're talking about 200 square foot apartments to really save the earth. And I guess if you wanted to save the earth even more, you'd live in a closet. Or I think I saw a bumper sticker that was kind of the end result of that kind of a program. It said, save the earth, kill yourself, or something like that. And that's basically the end goal of Agenda 21. So I'm not a strong supporter of Agenda 21, even if it changes its name into a whole bunch of different things that sound really friendly and sensible and all this stuff. It's lethal for humanity and for most other life forms on the planet. And the controllers that started the Agenda 21 idea through the United Nations know that if the population ever gets some of their native intelligence back, they would throw Agenda 21 in the garbage immediately. So they change its name into other things. And since Agenda 21 is meant to be enforced at the local level, then it's called all kinds of things at the local level, including smart growth. Now there's a new program, I think it's called Strong Cities. We didn't even get into discussing that. I wanted to with Tom, but we'll probably have him back to do that. They've got all kinds of programs that are basically Agenda 21 in disguise, and they all need to get thrown in the garbage. And the people that think they're doing a great service in planning need to reevaluate that, because the only planning for the future should be to make those cities self-sufficient so that they are stable, not under government slavery, because that's not stability at all. If they want to be truly resilient and all the phony keywords that they've thought up to make it sound great, they need to start growing food in small family organic farms all around the cities, get forms of energy that are both profitable and clean, which they've had for a long, long time. In fact, they've had totally free energy sources for at least many decades recently. And they would be all over the place. It's just the only little problem is the government has been either buying them off and hiding them, or in the case of people that don't sell, they just kill the inventors, which I don't also think is a very good idea. But that's why we don't see, truly solar-powered cars driving all over, not electric cars that need coal plants and nuclear plants to recharge them, because that's not free energy at all. That's a coal car or a nuclear car. Nothing new and nothing truly clean. But the technology has been available not only for totally self-sufficient solar, but power systems based on permanent magnets and all kinds of hydrogen technologies and things like that, that we don't need the government to help look for them. The government is killing the inventors. So we just need to have them stop little things like that, and then we wouldn't have an energy problem. But they're not going to do that because the mentality of the rulers is the type that comes up with programs like Agenda 21. So I thought it was worth having Tom come back, and he was nice enough to offer to do that. Tom DeWeese, and he's one of the global leaders in freedom and what in America is supposed to be constitutional government, which is just the acknowledgement and guarantee of God-given rights, not rights that come from government. Just like the UN wants to have rights that they give people. But anytime that any governing body, elected or otherwise, anytime that body grants the rights to the people, no matter how wonderful they sound, it's a trap, as they would say in Star Wars, because Emperor, whatever his name, said that. It's been played on Alex's show a lot. The reason it's a trap is because whatever the government gives, it always has the power, in its own mind anyway, to take away. So the thing that was good about recognizing that the rights come from God, or if you don't believe in God, maybe from nature, but they're inherent in you when you're born. They're not coming from some merciful good mood of your ruler on one day, which is very temporary and not secure at all. So anyway, Tom DeWeese knows about this kind of stuff. He's been teaching all over the world, and especially all over America, about freedom, constitutional government, the scam of Agenda 21, which is now in a new disguise called Agenda 2030, but it's not really disguised. I mean, there was an open meeting in New York a few weeks ago where it was talked about wide open for the public to know and hear. And I mean, even though the media, of course, the regular media just wouldn't tell the truth about it, but Alex Jones's show would and did, and a lot of other good private internet newscasts did tell the truth. So it's not a secret, except, that we don't hear about it through normal channels. And it needs to be stopped at the local level because that is where it is being enforced. One of the biggest weapons that's keeping it going is government grants and non-governmental organizations. So we're going to talk about stuff like that with Tom DeWeese, and then get into a very interesting illustration of how Agenda 21 works in ways you might not expect. With our second guest, it's going to be a really neat second half of the show, so I think you'll like that. But for right now, let's go listen to Tom DeWeese of AmericanPolicyCenter.org, which a site that you need to go to and take advantage of all the incredible educational material that he's got there. And let's go talk with Tom, and then we'll come back and get ready for the second guest. Talk to you soon. Welcome, everybody. This is Richard Sachs, broadcasting worldwide for Lost Arts Radio, and we are honored and fortunate to have our friend Tom DeWeese back with us to give us some important updates on what's going on with Agenda 21, most recently renamed Agenda 2030. And there are a number of things that are important that we didn't get to cover last time we were talking with Tom, and I was hoping that he'd come back and give us updates. There's some things that they're so new, I actually don't know anything about them, such as this new part of it called Strong Cities, and I think there's some other new agendas, probably some that none of us have heard of yet. And I want to see what the latest Tom does know about. So welcome, Tom, and thanks for coming back. I appreciate it.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks.
Let's start with a quick recap so we don't lose, the people that don't know about Agenda 2030, and just, give them a brief rundown of, I want to include in the discussion even people that, and this is really, unfortunately, the vast majority of the world still does not really know what Agenda 21 is. So we've got time, let's review what's Agenda 21 for the people that still have no idea and, are thinking that the UN is here to save us and keep everything pure and, whatever they're saying on their PR material. And then once we've corrected that impression to what they're actually doing, then go into Agenda 2030, and then we'll go into the new developments from there.
Yeah, sure. Well, Agenda 21 was first introduced to the world in 1992 at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. And, in their words, it was a comprehensive blueprint for reorganizing human society. And the whole point behind it was using environmental protection as the excuse. This is the way they sold it, as necessary, that, if you don't have a planet to live on, it doesn't matter how many rights you think you have, so you'd better curtail everything and pull it in and protect the environment.
Right.
And so that's been the scare tactic that they have used all those years, and the result of that has been, as they say, a reorganization of our society. Usually it's felt on the local level through your city councils, your county commissions, in what they call comprehensive development plans that affect your water use, your energy use, how you build, what you can build on, where you can build. It affects your jobs. It affects you driving in your car. One of the big points of it is a program called Smart Growth, is to get people out of your cars, living in what we call stack and pack communities that are high-rise buildings with high-density communities. And they sell it as just a wonderful kind of an 18th century atmosphere with modern convenience, where you can walk to your job, you can walk to the store, you can ride your bike. It's healthier because you're riding your bike and you're walking, and on and on and on.
I have to interject one thing there, and that's that what you said when you were introducing it as, coming down to the point, if we don't have a planet, then the other stuff really won't matter too much. And the thing that makes this so powerful is that that's true. And there's strong grains of truth in this, that you have to be really sophisticated to understand why what they're saying is really not what it seems.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that is, when you have to hook it to something that has a vein of truth to it, or people will reject it. Right. And so when you can say, well, look at this, and they go, oh, yeah. Well, but, of course, global warming, climate change is the main part of the environmental scare tactics that they hook onto. Mm-hmm. And it has, now you have a situation where actual scientists who are saying, I haven't found this to be true. I don't find the same data you do. Instead of a discussion, an argument, a debate, they are saying there is no debate. It is settled science, and therefore we must move forward with these programs anyway. And yet you've got thousands of scientists now. Every day, new ones come out and say, I haven't found this to be true. So when you find that a movement is trying to cut off debate, trying to not have a discussion on it at all, and even advocate penalizing people who disagree with you, and they've done that, it's like Senator Ted Cruz said the other day to the head of the Sierra Club in a senatorial hearing on this issue. He said, when you're trying to cut off debate, you're trying to refuse to face the facts. And that's exactly what they're doing. We're finding that there's no basis for these programs. Yeah, there's a need to protect the environment, and we have spent $1 trillion in this country on environmental protection. But if you listen to the Sierra Club talk today, you get the impression we've never done a single thing. Mm-hmm. We have the cleanest air and the cleanest water we've had in this country in a long, long, long time. We have more trees than we've ever had before. Just on and on like that. But if you look at the programs that they try to enforce on us as environmental protection, for example, wind turbines as an alternative mm-hmm. means for energy. Two things that I'll just give examples of why this is actually bad for the environment. If you wanted to make up the energy shortage just in the state of California using wind turbines, you would have to clear cut and pave over an area the size of Connecticut to do that, to set these turbines in place. And it takes more energy to create one of those turbines than that turbine would create on its own in its lifetime. The second thing is, we hear all this about protecting animals and endangered species and so forth. Those turbines, even the Audubon Society has called them Cuisinarts in the air. They are cutting up, blasting away at raptors, rare birds, bats, on and on and on, by the millions. As the more of these things that grow. So those aren't environmental protection, and that's what I mean. I have said jokingly, and I'm not joking, I guess, if you want to save the environment, send an environmentalist back to his high-rise in New York City. They're a danger to the environment.
Right. Yeah, and I think there are plenty of government programs that could be stopped that would help the environment a lot more than restricting what individual citizens are doing.
Well, in fact, one group that's the best at protecting the environment are property owners. They're going to keep their area clean. They're going to keep it taken care of. They're better at it than government, and particularly farmers. And yet, these are two groups that these programs are designed to attack. And small farmers are under siege in this country and are being put out of business at an alarming rate.
Yeah, I heard recently about some of them being fined because they were convicted of making dust in the farming operation.
Yeah, that's one of the things. And they, sustainable farming is one of the programs that they are enforcing. Sustainable farming dictates to the farmer how much energy he can use, any chemicals he can use, even sometimes what crops they're allowed to grow. And all this adds to the expense of the food. And in fact, sustainable development, which is the policy of Agenda 21, leads to sacrifice, higher prices, shortages, and higher taxes. That's what it leads to.
I would imagine that they would make sure that everybody was growing only GMO crops as well when they could.
Well, this is how it's moving down to it. Getting rid of the small farmer, a lot of organic farmers and so forth being put out of business through these methods, and the GMO massive corporate farms are becoming the only source of food as that happens.
Well, don't they get exemptions from some of the more difficult requirements and regulations if they're over a certain size?
One of the main tenets of putting Agenda 21 in place under the economic part of it is public-private partnerships. And you have a thing called benefit corporations.
Boy, that all sounds wonderful.
Farm corporations, yeah. Well, they get, if they play ball and are putting these programs in place, then they get to go to the head of the line for grants, for special privileges, for certain corporations can build where other companies can't. They use these kinds of regulations in partnership with government to put their competition out of business.
So basically, if government can bribe certain big corporations and make sure that they outcompete the small ones, then for the sake of saving the planet, they're making everybody on a small scale go out of business, right?
Yeah, it's basically government-sanctioned monopolies that are left, and they use, government gets to hide behind the independence of the business, and the businesses get to hide behind the power of government. These businesses, in many cases, are given the power of eminent domain themselves, power companies, and that sort of thing, and so they're able to, use that power in a pincer move from both directions, and competition is put out of business, and the consumer is screwed.
Wow, yeah, that I don't remember where in the list of enumerated powers in the Constitution all those things were authorized.
It's not. It's right out of really the Mussolini playbook for fascism.
Yeah.
And public-private partnerships. It is definitely not free enterprise. And I'll tell you, there are conservative groups who say they advocate free enterprise and libertarian groups that promote public-private partnerships as this is the way that we get government out of these things and we let the genius of private business run this.
Yeah.
I beg to differ with you. That's not free enterprise. That's fascism.
Yeah, they're not quite understanding what's really going on there.
That was me.
Wow. So the steps that were involved in Agenda 21 to get all the goals accomplished. Let's look again at what were the specific goals the stated goals and the real goals of Agenda 21, and what did they figure were the steps that would allow them to accomplish those?
It's such a massive plan that when you're talking about something that incorporates every aspect of your life. For example, one major part of it is social equity or social justice. Social justice is nothing but redistribution of wealth, and how they go about that is not just redistribution of wealth in your pocket, but it's also redistribution of wealth of whole countries. Particularly the United States was in the crosshairs on this from the very beginning because we were different from any other country in the world. We were established under the ideas of free markets, private property ownership, and individual liberty and limited government. And hardly any other nation on earth, was designed that way. And right off the bat, what Agenda 21 was designed to do was, in their words, harmonize the United States into the rest of the world. And what that means is we become socialist. We have top-down control from the federal government, and actually higher, and coming out through the United Nations. And they're working towards global governance. They don't make any apologies or try to hide that fact.
Well, Tom, let's try to make it clear, if we can, to the really well-intentioned good people I know of that believe that socialism is just doing the obvious solution to life, right? They're just saying government has the ability to give everything free if they want to, and they stop being unfriendly. And that if you just get some wise socialist in power, this phrase redistribution of wealth that they think is demonized by conservatives for no reason, because why shouldn't the poor people who are just dying and not having enough of anything be just finally given what they need? And I don't think they really understand why redistribution of wealth is not a good idea.
Well, first of all, government has nothing until it takes it. It produces nothing. It does not make wealth. It does not have wealth. It takes it. And wealth is created by individuals working on their own. There are those who create businesses. There are those who invest. There are those who work for businesses, but they're earning a living. And redistribution means that a government that has absolutely no part of creating that wealth in the first place comes in and says, okay, you've got enough. We're going to give it to these people over here. Well, what eventually happens... I'm sorry, go ahead.
We're not going to just give it to them. We have to do that little part before that. We have to steal it from you.
Exactly. And, the interesting thing, too, as you're doing that, I give a demonstration of this sometimes to in some kids' camps, is that, you have started a business, and you've been successful. And by doing that, you actually, you've hired people, you're paying people to work with you, and now you may, be a generous person. You want to help people who are less fortunate, but you're not allowed to just give it on your own and how it works best for you, but you can also help others. We need to have a bureaucracy in the middle, and they take more than half of it to begin with through the bureaucracy. So what trickles down to the people you're trying to help through government programs, all it does is it's a Band-Aid. They need a meal today. They need another one tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And there is nothing in any of these programs, the entire United Nations structure, and I debated this with the United Nations at Cambridge University in 2006, there is nothing in any of their programs that is designed to help somebody not be poor, to help them begin to build their own wealth. It's a Band-Aid to keep them alive till tomorrow. And when you do this, and you take, and you take, and you take, pretty soon the ones you're taking from finally find, I can't keep up with this, and they end up needing help. Now you've got more poor than you started with. You have a growth industry, and that is by design, because the more that the government, that are dependent on the government, the more power the government has, and you don't have the ability to say, stop this, because everything in your life depends on the government giving you your next handout instead of you being able to do it yourself.
Yeah, excellent point. And I think people don't realize that if somebody says they'll steal money from somebody who has what they think is too much and then give it to you, that's not really doing a service. That's a crime. And so,
theft.
right. And so when you talk about all the promises of socialism, it's just like you said, you've got an entity that's not producing anything itself. It's just saying, well, it promises to take it away from somebody else and give it to you and keep a large commission on the whole process. That's really just inviting you to be complicit in a criminal activity.
Yeah.
Right?
And what you're getting as you go along here, the more money that's taken, the more powerful the government gets, the more money that's flowing around in there, and the more power that's being wielded, you end up with corrupt government. And, the money corrupts, and those that get involved, and everybody wants to be in charge of how that money's being used and so forth. And you have massive corruption going on right now. The waste is just abominable. I mean, when you're spending trillions of dollars in so-called welfare programs and programs to supposedly help the poor, you know what? If you just gave that money to the poor, we wouldn't have any poor anymore. So what's their problem? The problem is the poor aren't getting it. It's all making the power of government, and it's become more corrupt. And this is the main thing we're looking at here. And go back to your original question here, to try to bring Agenda 21 down into a soundbite, which is nearly impossible. I've done it this way. There are three ways that they're really attacking us with this. One is a direct attack on private property rights. Private property is the means that people have used in this country to get wealthy. Regular individuals. I'm not talking about the Rockefellers. I'm talking about the Smiths. People to on their own building wealth. You cannot build real wealth just getting a paycheck every week. You've got to have assets. You've got to have other things. 60% of the companies in this country were started by people using the equity in their private property to fund their business. And 60% of the employees in this country work for such companies. So private property rights is the means to building wealth. That's illegal in most of the world. People aren't allowed to own private property, and that's why they can't get out of poverty. But so there's an attack through Agenda 21 on our private property. The second attack is the creation of non-elected regional governments. These are not your city councils, your county commissions. These are regional councils that come together to oversee what happens in a plethora of councils or of counties and so forth. And they're not elected. They're in the back rooms, and they're making their plans untouchable and unseen by the average person. And all of that is fueled by federal grants through the EPA, through HUD, through the Department of Transportation, and others. And those grants come with very specific strings attached that control how you develop, how you use water, or if you do, how you use energy, or if you do, on and on and on like that. That's how it's done. So those are the three ways: attack on private property, creation of non-elected regional governments that take government farther from the people, and fuel it all by federal grants. That's it in a nutshell.
That's good. Now, the first of those that you mentioned, the private property ownership, I noticed an interesting phenomenon happening certainly in this country and probably elsewhere, as the economy is systematically destroyed from the top, which is, clearly part of the overall agenda, so that everybody's dependent on government. But as that happens and progresses, you notice that private property ownership becomes more difficult to acquire, because you need a way, you have to have a situation where the average good job will earn enough money to buy your own property. And that's getting more and more rare right now in the U.S. So as it gets rare, the people who are saying, well, private property is elitist anyway, that really is not relevant to the vast majority of the population, and who are wage earners who can barely survive. And when you look at the reason for that, why the average job doesn't allow you to quickly get your own home and everything like that. You have to look right at the things that are leaching all of the natural wealth out of the country, such as two of the main ones being the existence of a central bank that has a monopoly on counterfeiting and can therefore own everything and suck the wealth out of the country. And second of all, the lack of protective trade tariffs that made it possible for industry to grow in this country and actually pay people well for working in it, replaced by what's called global competitiveness that brings you down to a level where nobody can earn enough to have private property. And it seems like it involves those things if you want to understand why private property seems more and more of an elitist concept.
Well, what you've just described is exactly what I was saying when I talked about their goal was to harmonize us. Right. That whole global market concept is that, and the lack of protections for American businesses. In fact, what they've done is they have put these massive environmental regulations on our industries here, where they cannot survive. They can't exist and compete. Mm-hmm. And so what they do is those companies end up moving out of this country into other countries. The interesting thing is when you have UN treaties, for example, the Kyoto Treaty in 1997, on which demanded that we cut back on our energy use and on our emissions and so forth. Mm-hmm. And American companies particularly, and those in Britain and in Europe and so forth also, but particularly American, were targeted, that we had to cut back, clear back to 1990 levels on our energy use. And that was to protect the environment. But interestingly enough, China, India, Brazil, these emerging nations that were now have emerged to the major industrial nations in the world were exempt. If you're talking about protecting the environment, doesn't that count everyone? Obviously not.
Was there ever a justification given for why those places were exempt?
You're talking about the UN here.
Sorry. I know.
Yeah, they, obviously China just refuses to go along with these things.
Okay.
And the point of it was, again, go back to what I said in the beginning. Redistribution of wealth is the purpose behind all of this.
Yeah.
And that's what they were doing. They were redistributing wealth from the United States to those nations, and they called that fair and equitable. And, well, we can't put those regulations on those countries because then they wouldn't be able to compete and move forward. But neither could we.
Yeah, exactly. Very interesting. And if you don't have protective tariffs anymore in favor of the modern global competitiveness, then you're basically encouraging any company that basically knows how to survive has to move out of the restricted country, right?
Yeah, and you've got, just as examples of that, Japan can flood our country with their cars, but nobody in Japan will buy our cars.
Right.
They have protective tariffs.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting overall view. So, okay, if they're working towards harmonization, basically, unified global government everywhere, and I guess it sounds better to say governance instead of government, right?
Well, I'll tell you that there's a very specific reason for that. You're right. It sounds better. What they do under governance is they leave in place. We'll still have our Congress, we'll still have our city councils and state legislatures and city or county commissions, and we'll still elect people to be there. But the only thing they can do is to follow the top-down dictates of this is how you will do things.
Right, they're facilitators, basically.
Exactly, yeah. But that's why they call it governance instead of government.
I didn't realize that. Okay.
They pretend we're still there,
Okay, I mean, you can see that theme. Some of these patterns are recognizable in multiple places in society, like turning the local governments into just figureheads that implement the policies that they get handed down from the top. look at the apparently diverse television news stations. They read off teleprompters with news coming from one corporate office that decides what everybody should believe. And I've noticed also in universities now, the teachers following the dictates of the accrediting agencies telling them what they have to do, they're becoming facilitators. They are not allowed to bring up what they know as teachers. They just have to recite the things out of the approved textbooks or they get fired. It's very similar.
You're absolutely correct. Yeah, absolutely correct. It's not just similar, it's all part of the same agenda, putting all that together. This agenda reaches into every single little splinter of our society and begins to change it everywhere. This is what makes it so difficult for us to attack it, because we find ourselves in opposition with organizations, foundations of this country that have been there for centuries in some cases. We find ourselves at odds with the Chamber of Commerce. We find ourselves at odds with the YWCA. I mean, and when you start doing that, then they start saying, "Oh, for crying out loud, what a conspiracy theory."
Yeah, but you're probably a right-wing terrorist conspiracy theorist, actually.
Absolutely. And so, this is where it becomes so difficult, because these are well-respected institutions.
Yeah,
and yet, knows that. What they don't understand is that the people pushing this have moved into those, and they've learned to use them. One of the, we're talking about private property rights, one of the organizations that I am absolutely at war with at this point is the National Association of Realtors. The National Association of Realtors should be, and they advertise that they help create the American dream, private property. You hear them talk about this in advertising.
Oh, yeah.
At least you used to.
Yeah.
And yet they are one of the biggest proponents of smart growth in this country. Smart growth is this system in the cities we've just talked about, a line around the community where no growth can take place outside of it. So now you have this area that doesn't grow, but the population does. What happens when that's done? They start to have to up density numbers to live there. That's what leads to these stack and pack high-rises. Right now, in Seattle, Washington, the mayor just a few weeks ago announced a plan to begin to work to eliminate private single-family home ownership.
Right.
And so now, you were talking about people not being able to buy property and becoming an elitist thing. It's not available. And what little bit is left becomes much more expensive. Report came out through Zillow just a couple of weeks ago that developers are no longer planning to build starter homes. These are the homes that young people and people of lower income use to begin to get into, to start the American dream. And they're not going to do that anymore. They're going to build single-family homes for the rich, and everything else is subsidized housing, basically apartment buildings.
Well, you could get a starter 200-square-foot apartment building to rent, though, right?
You can to rent, yeah, but that doesn't start you down the road to wealth.
No, exactly right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it starts you down the road to being a cog in the machine until you can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, as they're putting these programs in place, step by step, deliberately doing this, a news article comes out and says a new trend is more people coming out of high school and college today, young families, are renting. Golly, why do you think?
Amazing. It must be some sophisticated strategy.
Yeah.
So what is who at the Board of Realtors either totally doesn't understand what's going on or is benefiting in some way to encourage people to be trapped in these super dense cities?
We're back to the grants.
Oh,
the grants drive everything. This is the whole key to everything.
Okay.
And they've got grants to help them teach this, grants to help them promote it. These are coming from HUD primarily, sometimes from EPA. And they've got a smart growth manager at the head of the National Association of Realtors. And they also are having training seminars, which are paid for by these grants. And they get right back to those public-private partnerships we were talking about. They get to play with the big boys.
Okay, and because every citizen is convinced by the system that they're benefiting from some grant or other, Nobody wants to attack the problem, which is the whole ability of the government to give these illegal grants, which shouldn't be able to happen at all.
Absolutely, yeah. This is the whole structure of it, and that brings us to the what's just come out. Is coming out right now is a new program through HUD called the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Rule. And, for years, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, like the American Planning Association and Sierra Club, the Nature Conservancy, and these guys, have pushed communities to accept HUD grants for their development. They're in every single community has taken these grants. Every single community that now has taken a HUD grant in any way, shape, or form is now obligated to begin to put this new rule in place. The Affirmatively Fair Housing rule requires that agencies that apply for HUD grants to perform massive demographic analysis locally and regionally to determine any imbalances in living patterns as defined by HUD. So communities have to do these analysis to determine things like the recipients to analyze occupancy data, race. It includes race, color, religion, national origins, whether they're proficient in English, people living in these neighborhoods, and they create a matrix as to determine whether there's segregation or disproportionate representation of any of these things, and they've got to put them in place. This is social engineering in every single community, and it's interesting. Last time we had the census, and a bunch of us really protested that all of the intrusive questions that were there, because the Constitution just says there needs to be a count.
Right,
that's
exactly.
It. Yeah. All these other things about housing, do you rent, how many people live in your home, what age, all that.
Yeah.
We complain. They have now used that as the roadmap to put this plan together to determine who's living where, and now the plan is to begin to move people out of lower income areas into higher income areas. Now let's go back to private property. And I said private property is the means to build wealth. If you begin to put this so-called diversity into various neighborhoods, that is going to affect property values. It must, by rule. Whether you like it or not, that's exactly what's going to happen. And that means the people who worked hard to get a nice home, to live in a nice neighborhood, are going to have that ripped away from them, and their value is going to be crushed.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up this phrase "working hard," and I noticed. I wish I remembered what station it was on. It was maybe CNBC or MSNBC. There's this program that one of the women there runs, and she pointed out to somebody, they were talking about the confirmation of Paul Ryan, and somebody said, yeah, he's going to work really hard. And she said that working really hard is actually a racist statement. And
there we go.
Do you remember hearing about that? And I
didn't hear it, but I certainly...
She keeps a picture of the slaves working in the cotton fields on her office wall to remind her that that's what working hard is. And so if people talking about working hard, they're actually, insulting the people that were slaves. And so we're going to start deciding what parts of language are still acceptable to use. And that must tie in with what you're doing.
Yeah, everything is racist. Everything. So
I guess so. Yeah.
Whenever you want it, when you don't have an argument for anything else, you shout that out. The other day, I accidentally cut across MSNBC, not meaning to.
Yeah, that's all right.
And just for the moment, I listened to it for a second. Not very long, because I have a weak stomach.
Yeah.
But there was a woman on there talking about conservatives are always talking about the family and about spending time with your kids.
I know. It's just horrible.
Yeah, just a terrible. They're saying that is a Republican concept for the privileged, because when you're just trying to survive, you don't have time to take your time out like that. And she was very upset about conservatives always talking about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah. I mean, implying that you don't need welfare to achieve something.
Yeah. And my response to that is, if government would stop dragging people down by their wallets, then those poor victims might be able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Yeah, that's a good response. I have to remember that one. So, yeah, it's really, I mean, it's getting hard for people to comprehend why government doing everything for you is not a utopia.
Well, we've had so many examples of this, of failure in the world throughout history. But every time that's happened, then you get a new crop of socialists who come up and say, well, they didn't do it right. We will.
Exactly.
The fact is, as Maggie Thatcher said, the problem with redistribution of wealth or socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's exactly the situation here, and it's exactly what happens. When people start to be taken care of by the government, and keep in mind, that taking care of you comes with very strict rules. You're not allowed to work. If you do, you lose it. Right. And so even if you needed just a little bit of an assistance to get along, you have to get rid of your job in most cases and become fully compliant to them. And so there's no incentive to move forward.
Yeah.
Where eventually is this money going to come from? Where eventually is the food you eat going to come from? Where eventually is the car you drive, the house you live in going to be built? Where are those going to come from when everybody suddenly figures out, I don't have to work anymore. They're going to take care of me. I'm not doing this. And hard work, well, that's racist. I'm not going to do that. Mm-hmm. So now here we are with nothing. You know where that was? The Soviet Union. It collapsed under that for that very reason, because it was a joke. You go into a store and they have one pair of shoes. You go into the grocery and they might have a couple of apples. Yeah. This is socialism at its worst. And the one thing that every other socialist country has ever had backing them to help them go on a little bit longer is they had the United States helping give them our own, aid to keep them alive for a longer period of time. Even the Soviet Union had that. The United States doesn't. There's nobody going to come to save us. Mm-hmm. And so when we start to collapse under all this stuff, that's it. There's nothing propping it up to keep it going.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, it's a really challenging situation, to say the least. I think people have to get to the point where they can decode what they're being told in really fancy words, because number one, the United Nations, most people think of that as the most selfless, wonderful organization there is, and the goals that they put on, probably by sincere people working within the United Nations who don't even understand it, are saying we're going to do things like eliminate all poverty, basically eliminate just about all suffering, eliminate unfairness, give everybody, what did they say, decent work, and do all these wonderful things. And they're going to do it by one detail that they don't mention, which is complete tyranny and surveillance.
Yeah, give everybody decent work instead of hard work, I guess.
No, it can't be racist. And so why did they get to a point in trying to implement all these things locally through all this vast network of private organizations and in partnership with the government? Why did they decide at this point, or previous to this, that not to just continue? Why did they have to change the name of the main program to Agenda 2030?
Oh, the Agenda 2030?
Yeah, that just happened a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah, it just happened end of September in New York City.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a little history here. The Agenda 2030 has 17 goals that to be implemented by 2030.
And they're all wonderful.
And, Well, first of all, in 2000, the UN had the Millennium Summit. And there they introduced 8 goals to be fully implemented by 2015. Okay. And the 17 goals of 2030 are just those same 8 goals regurgitated in a little bit more detail. And the interesting thing is, and ending poverty in all of its forms everywhere was one of those goals of the first one.
Okay.
And they didn't work. They're a complete failure. Here we are in 2015 when we were supposed to have eliminated poverty. We're supposed to have implemented all these programs. It didn't work. So what's the UN's answer? This is progress inside the UN and in UN speak. Mm-hmm. If it didn't work at all, you take the exact same goals and now you double them and you give it another 15-year plan. It's not going to work then either. Yeah. But this is what they're doing. Why did they change it? They, for one reason that I know, is that we have had success in demonizing Agenda 21 and in some cases stopping some of these programs, beginning to slow things down. We've got more people in this country beginning to stand up to these things, legislators and the like, and we're helping them do a lot of things. We're working on legislative plans and so forth. Mm-hmm. And so the UN always changes the names and comes at it in a different way. My attitude about it is they've done us a huge favor because as we talk about Agenda 21, they always whack us with, that's an innocuous 20-year-old document. Didn't mean anything, just a suggestion. Mm-hmm. Even though they had 50,000 delegates, it was introduced by Nancy Pelosi in Congress. It's been, but it means nothing.
Yeah, it's totally voluntary. I mean, we know that. Right?
Oh, yes, totally voluntary. And so now they've done us a huge favor because in 2015 they've given us a whole new agenda. If we knew in 1992 what we know now, we could have had a much stronger impact on stopping Agenda 21 then. And so now we don't have to look at a 30-year-old, 20-year-old document. We can look at what's brand new and look at it in detail and know exactly what they have in mind and what they're doing with it. And that's what we're doing.
Okay. And again, I really think that most likely the people within the huge structure of the UN itself probably do believe they're working on one of the best projects in the world to end poverty, suffering, hunger, unfairness, violence, crime, all this stuff. And it's just that humanity as a whole is not yet sophisticated enough to really decode the words that we're being given about what's going to happen.
Well, you've got an entire generation now, people who are 40 years or younger, particularly in the United States, that have gone through the public school system, have been victims of this indoctrination that has been taking place, that hasn't taught history, hasn't taught economics, a very narrow worldview that only fits their agenda. And they have demonized anybody who talks about individuality, individual effort, free enterprise, as we just have been talking. And so they demonize all that. Immediately, they react to that as evil. We can't do that. And the attack on free enterprise now is just everywhere. Interestingly enough, the American Planning Association, which is one of the major planners in the country, and has been one of these groups that I said has been respected, but now has changed, and here we are attacking them. But they are in every single community, putting these programs in place. And if you go into their website, and there's a thing called plannersnetwork.org, and their statement of principles, they talk about the planning is, well, here's what it says. It says, we believe planning should be a tool for allocating resources and eliminating the great inequalities of wealth and power in our society because the free market has proven incapable of doing this. That is redistribution of wealth. That is socialism. That is top-down control, and that is what every single planner who's putting these plans in place in your community believe, and that's what's in their programs.
Okay, so this is another example of not understanding language, right? Because they remember in the founding document somewhere there was this thing about everybody being created equal. So now that we don't see equality in what everybody's position in life is, in order to implement the American ideal, we have to make everybody equal. And that's what they're doing, and eliminate unfairness.
what that document was talking about was equal opportunity.
Right.
And you had an equal opportunity to succeed and an equal opportunity to fail. It was on you, but nobody was going to hold you back and tell you that you had to be in a certain caste, a certain level of life. In most countries, that's where you're stuck there for the rest of your life. This was a direct attack on the king. We weren't going to have kings and so forth, but it didn't guarantee you success. It guaranteed you an opportunity to success.
So everybody would have a chance to get the private property that you're saying is the basis of wealth, right?
Yeah.
And I realize...
This is the reason...
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well,
this is the reason why so many people immigrated here.
Yeah.
They wanted to be here because here they knew they had the opportunity to succeed because they were hard workers, they were honest people, they were determined, and they came here for that opportunity. Now we have people flooding over our borders, not for any of those reasons, but to get the free handouts that we're giving that are paid for by those same people who are trying to work hard.
Right. And I realize another reason that people who actually are working hard and creatively at something, it's much, much less likely that they'll ever be able to get private property under the current system, not just because of the lack of protective tariff structure for trade to protect American industry, but also, or any other country's industry, but also because when the federal government that is allowed to own, 10 miles square in Washington, D.C., and a few forts and things, starts owning like 40% of all the real estate in the entire country, then it's all red on that map that shows federal ownership, and you can't have everybody owning a house or a farm or a ranch or whatever they want because the government owns most of the land, at least in the western part.
Yeah, it's all by design. It's they give us all these arguments that we have to live on less to protect the environment and so forth.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is that we have to live on less because of their programs, not because of that. I laugh every time I hear about overpopulation and overdevelopment. Get in an airplane and fly over and look and see how much open land there is untouched. I just drove to Albany, New York. The whole corridor I drove up to was all areas that have been settled in this country for 200 years. The vast amount of area where there are no people on that trip is astounding when you think about it. We don't have an overpopulation problem. We have too bad a government problem. Too much government.
Yeah, exactly. So is there any difference in Agenda 2030 from Agenda 21, according to what you can see? No.
None whatsoever. It's the same stuff that we've been fighting. They've just outlined it, where they said that Agenda 21 was a blueprint and a suggestion. And in fact, they say right in the preamble for Agenda 2030, this will be done. And this is now a much clearer written agenda, where Agenda 21 was, lots of good terms and nice words and all that. This gets very, very specific because each of the goals, the 17 goals, have several pages of details of what they actually mean when they say it. They detail enforcing sustainable farming tactics, and that as I said before, that means controlling what you can grow, how you grow it, and they detail, and particularly under the they're going to end hunger. That's number 2. We're going to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. They talk about to ensure access to fair and equitable sharing of benefits. Here we go back to redistribution of wealth.
Yeah.
And all that. So
yeah, amazing. And I guess the GMO foods are going to give us the health and better agriculture and feed the world and all those things, even though they don't produce as much food and they give everybody cancer. And in 3 generations, all the animals that ate them are sterile. But
keep in mind that one of the major goals here to make all these plans work is a vast reduction of population.
Yeah.
And how's that going to happen? And if you got people dying of cancer,
that helps a lot.
Millions, that helps.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that comes up as a question for me looking at some of the underlying problems that are making movement toward the accomplishment of these agendas possible, is that when the government is doing things, there's some patterns here that I noticed. We talked about the government owning vast amounts of real estate in the states, and therefore helping to make the price of owning your own home, farm, or ranch out of reach of most people. They're also doing things like giving priority to the kinds of agriculture that will end up reducing population by poisoning everybody. They're supporting a medical system that's keeping everybody addicted to drugs and sick. All of these things at the federal level have something in common, and that's that they're all completely and specifically illegal. And this has been going on for quite a while, and I think its continuation is essential to the success of Agenda 2030. So has anybody come up with any idea to stop the federal government from doing the things that are specifically illegal and prohibited?
Well, there's a movement that's beginning to grow on nullification, for one thing.
Okay.
Looking at one of the things that when I'm fighting these things, I rarely do it through Congress. I see that as kind of a hopeless case, starting from that point.
Yeah.
But working on the local level, this is where we're beginning to have success. And if you could stop it in your community, then you can begin to work in your state legislature, and then these things have a way of trickling up.
Right.
As you do it, you get new people to start to fight it, and so that's how we're doing it, and that's where we're having some successes. And I'm now working with some state legislators. One of the things that you learn as you go along. You think, well, maybe this will work. And what we've done over the last few years is try to put together kind of like a one-size-fits-all bill in a state. They did it in Alabama, and they did pass it there, and the governor signed it. That's the only place it's happened. But other states have attempted to do it too, and they find themselves getting absolutely shot down as they try to do it. And even in Alabama, the bill has no teeth because it says things like, we're going to ban Agenda 21 programs.
Okay.
Well, the other side never uses that term, and they say, this isn't that, this is just local.
Right.
And they say we're going to protect private property rights, but they don't define what property rights are.
Okay.
And so if you put one bill together, you get this attack from the other side. They put all their forces in to kill it. And you can't. What we're looking at now is putting together a legislative agenda, 1,000 points of light, 1,000 bee stings to come at it. Just exactly the way they put it in place, but to kind of keep them busy, and to shut down these programs a little piece at a time, and let that grow from there.
And that's to do at the state level, right?
Yeah.
So you were
can
saying,
do it on the county level as well.
Okay. So people should start. Well, first of all, since the vast majority of people are the ones that are working are so busy trying to just survive, it's really hard for them to imagine starting to take time out to become aware of what these little corporations called cities, towns, and counties are actually doing. And most of them are coming up with all kinds of new laws and rules and regulations all the time, and they're doing it hardly being watched in most cases. So it seems like people have to find some way to take time to become aware of what's being done by the rulers, right?
Yeah, they do. I mean, you have to. The one thing we find is that the more progress that the other side makes in putting these things in place, the more people they affect, and that means more people join the fight. Now they can see it, they understand it. I get calls now from people I never got before, particularly from elected officials, township trustees and city councilmen and county commissioners that are saying, what do I do? And I'll talk to them for a while and say, try this, try that. They'll call me back in a couple of weeks and say, okay, I did that. Now what do I do? We never had that before. Just a couple of months ago, I was invited to address a committee on these issues in the Maine legislature. and in the state of Maine, and I've got some people now working to try to do the same thing in Michigan. Never happened before. People are becoming aware, and things are so nuts today that it's kind of taken away our tinfoil hats, and people are ready to believe what we're telling them because they can see it right in front of them. How do you explain this craziness that's going on? And we begin to tell them, they go, oh, and they're starting to listen now more than they have in the last 20 years.
So are you encouraging the people who get into these positions in towns and cities to start refusing the grants that have the strings attached? Absolutely.
That's the first thing to do. That is the very first thing, because that's the poison. That's the Kool-Aid.
Right.
And we just had, this is an interesting thing, in Rindge, New Hampshire, a tiny little town in New Hampshire. It doesn't even have a downtown. I addressed them back in July. They, on their own, began to find their county government doing these crazy things. They didn't know anything about Sustainable Development Agenda 21, but they didn't like what was happening. And they rose up and they actually elected a whole new county council, and they got rid of these programs. And the best thing they did was they made it so that in order for the county government to apply for a new HUD grant, they must first have a referendum by the people to vote on it. Huge. And
wow.
That's something I keep advocating to other communities they need to do.
So this would be like a model county for other counties to look at, right?
It's this tiny little place, but yes, and they're adamant. When I was there in July, now this is after they did all these things, they were already telling me that they're coming at them from different directions now. The battle's not over. This is the other thing. Our people have a tendency, it's because we're busy, it's because we're trying to raise our families and work our jobs, but we go out and we go to a meeting, we accomplish something, we sign a petition, make a phone call, whatever, we go home. The other side is expecting you to go home. They wait for you to go home, and then they just go ahead and do what they want to do. And they always are changing the names of the programs. They're always coming at it from a different direction. We've got to stay vigilant. We've got to stay in the fight.
So that's their full-time paid occupation, and they're well-funded for it, right?
Sure, and that's what makes it so hard to fight, because we got to live another way.
Yeah, exactly. So it's almost got to be a tag team between people in the out in the population that are willing to cooperate and help each other, so that one of them doesn't have to be there all the time.
Yeah, I've got a booklet on my website at AmericanPolicy.org. It's a little $6 booklet. It's called Special Report Agenda 21 and How to Stop It. And it's got a lot of these details in it, and it's got a resolution that we've created for the protection of citizens' property rights, and it goes through details how to use it and how to fight back.
Yeah. Another thing that I realize people need to understand is that when there's not government intrusion, it doesn't mean that people are starving because there are no programs. First of all, there's a lot more natural wealth in circulation because it's not all being stolen by fake banking systems and things like that, which is really happening now, but also because, human civilizations, hopefully ours is enlightened enough so that people actually want to help each other. There are private charities that give people money without strings attached. And it seems like that would be an honest way to have programs in place to help the people that need it.
Sure. I mean, first of all, if you're struggling to survive yourself, then the last thing you're thinking about is trying to help somebody else.
Right.
If you're succeeding, if you're prospering, then that's one of the first things you think about. That's been a history of people in our country. We're a very generous country, and they've used that generosity against us by forcing these programs in place and using that, guilt against us, for it. But the fact of the matter is that, if you were giving it yourself in a charity, it would get to the place you want it to be, and you chose, and you chose how much you can afford to do. And these government cases, you've got this bureaucracy in the middle sucking up at least half of it, so it doesn't even, it's just trickling down to people you want to help. It's a ridiculous situation, and you're absolutely right. It would work much better, free people making free decisions, and it would definitely be helping people, because they did. We set up all these charities over the years, but they're all suffering because the money's all going to the government.
Yeah, it's all going to the government and their bosses, which are in the banking system, and they're allowed to take the solid money, which according to the Constitution is supposed to be gold and silver, and give out all kinds of worthless paper, which can be devalued overnight. It actually is constantly devalued. And I would imagine it would be the same thing if you wanted to send money to people in another country to help them. You're certainly welcome to do that, but you can't steal it from somebody else to send overseas like the government does.
Exactly.
So there wouldn't be any government foreign aid, right?
Yeah, I mean,
because it's illegal.
Yeah, it's insanity what we do with foreign aid.
Yeah. I mean, Robin Hood is a nice idea, but this is not Robin Hood. This is something really different.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, let's see there. I wanted to ask you a question halfway through what you were saying. You were talking a little bit about private property and how that's seen as unsustainable. And again, I'm just amazed at how sophisticated the whole program is to use really appealing, basically really good words like sustainability, which I remember talking about that word in the mid-1960s when we were really doing sustainable farming and organic gardening and things like that, and sustainable practices, which meant, we thought the government should not be assassinating people who brought up clean energy devices, of which there were plenty, to run everything without any pollution. And those concepts are good. And those are the ones that are used to commit these crimes for the destruction of society. And so, we're looking at the other things that are now defined by the UN or whoever's the boss is running that place. The things that are unsustainable are things like getting to have your own transportation, getting to decide where you work and what kind of job you do, what kind of business you're allowed to start, what you eat during the day. I mean, those are all unsustainable for you to do for yourself, right?
Yeah. I have people run into me and they'll say, well, I like living in these communities where I can walk to work and go to the grocery, and ride my bike and have public transportation. And I say to them, wonderful, terrific, have it.
Yeah.
Don't tell me I have to. And that's the difference here.
That's a really big difference, yeah. And they have the idea that there should be somebody in control who has better judgment than everybody else and should decide what everyone should do. And it's basically the definition of totalitarian government.
Exactly. You have all these non-governmental organizations, and some of them may have some great ideas. And if they want to educate people on those ideas, have at it. Have a great time doing that. If you want to talk to people about what kind of foods they should eat, or child rearing, or whatever the case may be,
it's actually positive. I mean, to spread creativity and everybody thinking of better ways to do things is great.
Yeah, but if don't start working to pass laws that tell us we have to do that. If your idea is a good one, we'll do it. I remember in the early 60s that my mother took the car down and had seat belts installed in it on her own. There weren't seat belt laws then. Yeah. She did it on her own because she read things saying this is safer. I remember. That's the way it should work.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the whole theme, at least in this country, and I'm sure people would like it everywhere, there are not whole countries of people that hate freedom. That's really not true from what I've seen at all. But this country was appealing to people because the idea was supposed to be about freedom, and freedom itself has been demonized and characterized as something that would let everybody just go berserk and destroy everything. And that's why we need totalitarian government.
Yeah. Fact of the matter is, America's founding documents are some of the most popular documents being read, passed through the internet and so forth in other countries. And I have said many times that I fear that someday freedom is going to wash up on our shores from somewhere else. After we have thrown it all away and lost it, some other people in other countries are going to rise up and create freedom, and they're going to bring it back to us.
Yeah, well, that's okay. I mean, if we get it from anywhere at this point, it would be a big step forward.
We should have it for our own because we already have it. We're throwing it away, and that's the tragedy of the whole thing. And people in those other countries are watching us do this, and they are holding their heads saying, what are you doing? Every single person I've ever met who lived in, for example, Eastern Europe, where they lived under totalitarianism, under communism, to a person, they have told me they see it coming here. It's exactly the same process, the same words, the same way they do it, and they just sit there and go, oh, no, not here. But we're doing it.
Yeah, all kinds of warnings coming from other countries. I've heard it from Australia and England, Canada. I mean, supposedly other countries that are held up as examples of what we need to become. And the people there are warning against doing what their governments did.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that's absolutely true. Well, I would say we should get down to kind of a summary. We've got about 7 minutes. And I'd like to see, maybe a few key points to leave people with ideas of what they can actually not just feel upset about, although that's important as motivation, but how they can respond to that in the most positive way wherever they live. And I think part of it's going to have to be, if they can possibly do it, to find some time to see what their rulers are in the midst of doing to them locally.
Yeah. I think the first thing is that people need to get mad because and stop being made to feel guilty because they are living a certain way and they want something and they've earned it, and start looking at who's trying to take that away from you and why. Yeah. But in your own community, there are documents there you can get copies of out of your most communities have their own websites. You can look and see where these grant programs are coming. You can see the grant programs and what they're saying. You can begin to see that. Look at these NGO groups. They come in and claim themselves as stakeholders in your community.
Yeah, that's a term that's impressive, but how many people understand at all what that means? We should talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, they come into the community, and if you look at these documents, you will see it'll talk about we're working with the stakeholders and social groups and our civic, what do they call it, civic society. Yeah,
the stakeholders. Wow, that sounds important. Yeah. I mean, all we are is people that live here.
Well, the fact of the matter is, you, the people who live there, are the stakeholders. These so-called stakeholders, they claim that they are from outside of town 95% of the time. They don't even belong there. They move around the country putting these things in place. The fact of the matter is they're not stakeholders, they're carpetbaggers. And so they have no status there. The only reason these NGO groups coming into the community, bringing their grant programs in, bringing all their plans in, the only reason that they have any status at all is because your elected officials give it to them. If they didn't give it to them, they dry up and blow away. They don't have any more standing than you or I do. In fact, we have more if we're community, in the community.
Right, and the reason that the elected rulers do that is what?
Well, this is their stormtroopers. This is their army. Let me go through this real quick. I mean, when Agenda 21 was created, the same organizations that created it went into the federal government, set up these, worked with the bureaucracy to set up these grant programs. They then went into the state legislatures, lobbied there to get the state legislatures to pass regulations that every community had to do a comprehensive development plan. Now you've got your city councils, county commissioners sitting there going, what the heck is a comprehensive development plan? In come the same NGOs all the way through, and saying, we've got it all right here for you in a box. You don't even have to think, and we've got the money for you. And the money comes with strings attached that says this is what you have to do. Right. That's the way it's been brought in. They work in the back rooms of every single local government, bringing these things in place, out of sight, and that is not freedom, working in the back rooms like that. And you have no say and no understanding of what they're doing.
Right. Okay, so once you understand that's going on, and you take some time to find out, what's being brought up and for implementation in your community. And I also have to add one more thing. One of our recent guests from the legislature in Idaho, Heather Scott, had brought up the thing that not only is the state level government passing laws as fast as they possibly can that restrict your life, but they're also empowering agencies that you don't even know exist to make regulations that are basically de facto laws. And those are closing in as well at the same time, right? And they're not the county and city.
Yeah, and the other entity besides those agencies are these regional councils that are being put in place. Now, they will argue that, well, there are elected officials on them. There are city councilmen and there's county commissioners and what have you on those councils, but they were not elected to that council. Right. And this enables them to work in the back rooms untouched by the community. And what I argue is that there are opportunities. There are times when it might be important for elected officials from different communities to get together and talk about mutual problems. No question about it. But once they've talked about that and come up with a plan, they need to bring it back to their communities under the position of their elected position as a city councilman or whatever they are, and face the people, not allow these councils to have the ability to legislate or to even apply for grants. They need to do that on the local level where you can get at them. And that's a major part. So those are the things to watch for as you do it. And those are the things to stand up against.
And it would be nice to elect people in your local communities that are aware of as much of this as possible and have the understanding to not accept the grants.
Yeah,
right?
This is key. And that's why I say the private property rights, the non-elected councils, and the grants. Those are the three areas to watch for. If first of all, you cannot impose sustainable development policies without damaging private property rights. So even though this is so vast and it covers so many other things, if you can begin to stand up for private property and protect that, you can stop the implementation of these programs. And so that's why, again, I say that booklet we have tells you how to do that. It has a resolution in it. You can also download it from my website at AmericanPolicy.org, and we tell you how to use that. And it's a tool to stand up for private property rights and stop these things.
Okay, so in the last minute that we've got here, I want to remind people that I would really encourage them to support everything that you're doing. And I'm assuming that it's possible for people to donate to your efforts. And if they do, what are the things you need to accomplish with money that might come in?
Well, first of all, we don't get any grants from anybody. So all our donations are from individuals. And, we're a very small, lean, mean operation.
Right.
But we have led this fight. The American Policy Center has been the center of the fight to expose all of this and to organize people around the country. And for as small as we are and as limited as our income is, I think we've accomplished some amazing things. You can go to my website. You can see about a 15-year archive of articles we've written on all this. My newsletter, the DeWeese Report, has been the center focus on getting this information out. So all that information is there on the website. But we are working with legislators now to try to put together legislative plans to go after this stuff, look for stronger ways to do these things, better ways, always looking for new things, and we created a lot of new tools to fight back, and they're all on the website.
Okay, so everybody should go there, and I'm assuming there's a way on the website if they want to donate to what you're doing, right?
Absolutely, sure.
Okay, sounds good.
We appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Tom. I really enjoyed it. It felt like about 5 minutes, as usual. And hopefully we'll stay in touch and do it some more as new developments come up on both sides.
Absolutely. I'm here.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
summer sun casts a golden glow. Faded lines, spinning tires, take me home. Windows down, I need my space. Humid breeze touches my face. It's a southern summer like no other I recall. It's been years of tear-filled dreams, but I'm heading closer, more and more it seems, to a southern summer, getting warmer, shine me home. City lights far behind, up ahead nears the county line. Birds are burning, wheels are turning, forward home. It's been years of tear-filled dreams, but I'm heading closer, more and more it seems, to a southern summer, getting warmer, shine me home. These old sights keep me sane. Gravel roads take me back again to a southern summer like no other. Take me home. It's been years of tear-filled dreams, but I'm heading closer, more and more it seems, to a southern summer, getting warmer, shine me home. It's been years of tear-filled dreams, but I'm heading closer, more and more it seems, to a southern summer, getting warmer, shine me home.
That was the Votes Sisters, Southern Summer. Their website is votessisters.com, and it's VOGTS sisters.com. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Lost Arts Radio. Visit our website at lostartsradio.com for Richard's weekly focus articles, as well as lots of other free educational resources. We also have links to all of the great independent musicians whose music that we feature each week on Lost Arts Radio. And please check out our new store page at richard.talknetwork.com. This is our new branded link for our store page on our new radio network, which is talknetwork.com. And if you like Lost Arts Radio, please consider donating a few bucks or just leave us a tip to help us stay on the air. We spend many, many hours each week to bring you the best show we can with the best guests around. You can find our donate button on our website at lostartsradio.com. And now back to Richard.
Thank you, Doug. And that little detail that Doug just mentioned that I haven't mentioned yet, it's kind of important. Starting on the 14th of November, same night, 1 hour earlier than you're used to hearing us, we'll be participating in the startup of a new, exciting new network project. That's talknetwork.com in connection with Mike Adams, who's been great at setting up beneficial projects up to now in many different areas. And this should be no exception as far as its success goes. So I hope you'll join us there. And you'll still hear all of our archives up to now through Blog Talk. And then we'll be off next Saturday getting ready for the change. And then the inaugural show that I hope you'll join us for on the 14th at talknetwork.com. And the store link that hopefully will give us a few dollars to keep the show going. But we really need anybody that has the money, is not struggling to pay bills, and wants to support us, likes the programming that we give. You might consider, like Doug said, doing a donation on our website, which is lostartsradio.com. Now, we just finished with our friend Tom DeWeese, and this issue about private property is really important because it's come up, a lot of people mentioning that, well, private property is something that's only applies to a smaller and smaller percentage of the population. Excuse me. And so if you say that's really essential for freedom, and it's not good that it's being attacked by Agenda 21, you have to realize why it's getting more and more rare for people to actually own their own homes or even left farms and ranches. And it's because in this extremely wealthy country, most of the wealth is being sucked out by the central bank. And if you're not aware of that, you need to wake up to that scam, because it's a massive, massive organized crime that's going on and stealing huge amounts of money every second right out of the economy. And it's a very sophisticated way that it's being done by printing money that there's nothing to give value to. And so the value of the money that you're holding goes down more and more and more, while the elite, so-called elite rulers hold their money in gold and silver that does not devalue. In fact, it goes the other direction. So that's a long subject. I don't want to use up time, because our next guest is really exciting that we got her on. In fact, she's a mutual friend of ours, and also Tom DeWeese, who really said, what's wrong with you? You should have Katharine Dokken on your show. And it turned out he was absolutely right, that she brings a very unique perspective and firsthand account of how the Agenda 21 plan and mentality spreading through our country and other parts of the world with the help of so many people that are working for Agenda 21 and don't even realize it. And this has to do with the area of animal rights, and really up until getting Katharine's explanation, I didn't really understand how animal rights was anything other than trying to fight the abuse of animals. And she educated me, and I was able to confirm everything she's saying is true. And you really need to listen to Katharine and learn not just about animal rights and the corruption that's there and the deception that's being perpetrated on the American people, but what that represents and how everything around us is turning out to be the opposite of what it seems, using misleading language. And we need to get sophisticated enough to understand the reality behind it. So let's look at this really important example with Katharine Dokken, who hopefully will come back again soon, and then stay after the interview there, and I'll give you the last couple of minutes of important announcements when we're done with Katharine. Thanks. Welcome, everybody. This is Richard Sachs, broadcasting for Lost Arts Radio worldwide, and in the earlier part of this show, we talked to Tom DeWeese about Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, what's going on with that whole movement, and now we're going to get a special privilege and chance to talk to Katharine Dokken, who's the author of some books that we're going to find out about, and she became an activist in areas that are very much connected to Agenda 21, but more in specific ways that we're going to be able to find out about, talking with her what's really going on with the animal rights movement, which I think is the way that she got involved in the activist project that she's doing now on her website, and all of the different outreach programs that she's doing in educating people. So welcome, Katharine. I'm really glad you're here, and I'm hoping to learn a lot from what you've done.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and it is a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure too. So listen, the way I'd like to start out with this, in order to bring in people who really do not know anything about the subjects that you're going to be covering, go back to before you got involved in these interests yourself. And, tell us, kind of give us a little bit of context, bring us up to date in what you were doing when that was in your normal life prior to all of this concern that we're going to discuss, and what changed for you and how it got you interested in this new area of involvement.
Well, that really goes pretty far back, but okay. It goes back to my very first purebred dog that I ever owned, and it was an Akita. And when I purchased this dog, I wasn't aware of different breed ban laws. And so I got this dog, and I was in the process of purchasing a home at the same time. And I mentioned to the homeowner's insurance agent that I owned this dog, and I found out that they would not issue me homeowner's insurance because of the type of dog I owned.
Wow.
And so that was really my introduction to all of this, because I wanted to find out why. What was the whole purpose behind this? This is a perfectly acceptable, nice dog who had never harmed anybody. I'm like, why will you not issue me homeowners insurance?
Yeah, and now you mentioned breed ban laws. Is this an example of that?
Yes, it is. But It's not only legislative laws, it's also the insurance industry.
Okay. All right, so what happened? Go ahead.
Ultimately, I just had to call a number of different agencies before I found a homeowner's insurance company that would issue me insurance for my new home. But this encouraged me to find out what was going on behind this.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what was going
on? Basically, animal rights activists are behind breed ban laws. They wish to discourage animal ownership, and so they're willing to attack one dog breed at a time to do it.
Okay, yeah, because the average person would probably just think, wow, they must have had a lot of people killed by this kind of dog, and they're just trying to protect society, by keeping them away and that sort of thing. And you found out that that's totally not the case.
That's totally not the case.
Okay. So how did you find this out? I mean, you must have had to do some investigation because it wasn't obvious on the surface.
I had to do a lot of investigation, and this was back in the days before the advent of the internet. So it really required a lot of research, a lot of talking to a lot of people, and looking through a lot of newspaper archives, and just a lot of in-depth investigative research in order to discover what was behind this. And I felt as an animal owner, it was my responsibility to protect my dog, and so I wanted to find out why were these people against my dogs.
Yeah. So why do you think they're against your dog?
Well, animal rights activists do not believe that we have the right to own animals.
See, that I want to go.
That's really the fundamental.
I want to go into that a little bit because remember we're talking to as much a big a section of the average population as we possibly can. General population, nobody's really average.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that have just taken these labels like animal rights activist is a label, right? And you're supposed to have this bullet point definition of what they are. And those are the people that feel really sorry for the animals and want to take better care of them. That's what most people would probably think. So you have to do some kind of introduction as to why is that completely wrong and what kind of people are these that you're talking about?
Well, the important distinction needs to be made between animal welfare and animal rights. Animal welfare is the belief that human beings should take good care of animals, and I think we all agree with that. The difference is animal rights activists do not believe that human beings have the right to own or use an animal. So it's a radically different viewpoint, and unfortunately the animal rights activists have really taken over the animal welfare side of things and confused people on this issue, and it's deliberate because they do not want us to own or use an animal.
Okay, so they have decided that any human use of animals is basically immoral, and so is that their stated objective to get that stopped?
No, that is not their stated objective. They usually go out and have these campaigns to just provide a more humane care for an animal, and that's what they like to portray themselves as. You really have to do a deep investigation into the results of their actions to find out that in the end they really want the animals to die.
Okay, so what did you uncover that really let you understand that? Because it wasn't their policies that are published on their websites and things like that. It was something else.
Well, I think there's a lot of different stories that really resonate with people, and I think with me, the story that really resonates the most is the story of Free Willy. I mean, this is a story of an orca that is being kept by a marine park, perhaps not in the best condition. And you have Hollywood who made several movies about it. Millions of American children donated their hard-earned money to free this whale. And they did not understand the policies and the politics behind the whole campaign. And they did not understand that this whale had lived almost his entire life in captivity. And so there was this concerted effort to free this whale. And experts in the field spent 5 years trying to teach this whale how to hunt. And he couldn't learn. But the animal rights activists insisted that he had to be freed. And so they set him free in the ocean, and he ultimately died a horrific death. And to me, that whole story just resonates with me so much that this poor animal was set loose, and he could not fend for himself, and he ultimately ended up dying.
Wow. Yeah, I remember actually I saw that movie. I think I took some kids to it, and no idea that was the case. I mean, you really tend to believe what is professionally portrayed in the movies.
Yes, and unfortunately, Hollywood is not reality.
Right. Okay, so I want to know, if it was that or that plus other things, what you must have started out with the same misunderstanding about what animal rights people were doing as most people, right? And then
Absolutely.
Your investigation changed your mind. So what were some of the other things you ran into that made it clear?
Well, over time, I eventually became a standard poodle breeder. I sort of transitioned from being with Akitas to owning standard poodles, and I ended up showing them in a show ring. And I ended up breeding litters out of my champion dogs and selling some of the offspring to be service animals. And it was through this activism with showing that I started hearing from other people how animal rights activists were targeting breeders. But I really didn't believe it. I really believed that they were only going after the bad apples.
Well,
and
right.
I thought that if I did everything right,
that's what the publicity normally says, because I think I've seen some of it, that some dog breeders, they always say that they're keeping the animals in really terrible conditions and that they're breeding millions of animals that are going to breed millions of more animals, and there's going to be nothing but 3 feet of poodles over the whole earth, and they have to be stopped or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what they say. And I had this misconception that if I did everything right, I would be one of the good breeders and they would not target me. And unfortunately, I found out that I was wrong. They did target me directly, and they came to my property and they stole all of my champion dogs. And so I learned firsthand that it does not matter how good you are, they will still come after you.
Okay, so how did they manage to steal your dogs? What happened with that?
Well, they showed up at my home on April 10th, 2010, with already loaded raid trucks, and they came into my property and they took all of my animals, and then they left with them.
Yeah, well, now, I mean, I figured that, but if somebody shows up like that, I mean, private criminals usually can be resisted by homeowners, so how did they avoid that?
Well, they can. Unfortunately, I live in Fauquier County, Virginia, which is one of the most corrupt counties in all of Virginia. It is the headquarters of the environmentalist movement and the animal rights activists in Virginia. And they have corrupted the local law enforcement and court system, and they're notorious for this. And I wasn't aware of this as a newcomer to this county. And so they have what they call a civil asset forfeiture law for animals, and that's passed in Virginia, that allows these private vigilantes to come onto your property and take your animals.
So they're saying that that's because you're suspected of something? Is that the reason?
Right. Absolutely.
Okay. Like I know when they steal your cash in a car, like Tennessee and other states have had the police departments stealing people's money because they say that if they have any cash, they must be a drug dealer, right? And so,
absolutely.
And because there are microscopic amounts of drugs on all cash, they can prove it and never give it back. And I wondered if it's related to that.
Absolutely, it's related to that. In Virginia, we've had cases where animal owners have been found guilty of animal cruelty for failing to brush their dog's teeth. That is the law in this state. So at any given moment, any animal owner in Virginia is guilty of cruelty. There's no way that you can be a perfect person at all times. And so they use civil asset forfeiture laws to take your animals away. And ultimately, if you look at these cases, they go after people with valuable animals.
Well, do they sell them and make money from them, or what do they do with them?
Absolutely, they do. The woman who took my animals is the daughter of a multimillionaire lawyer, and she makes millions every year reselling animals. I
see. Okay. So, boy, you can see where, I mean, I know I'm not trying to be facetious here, but I can imagine where it would go that by the same token, people that didn't brush their own teeth could be taken into slavery. But, it's just, the whole civil forfeiture idea is denial of due process, right? And you're guilty until proven innocent, basically.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when they took your animals, which not only were really valuable, but you were personally attached to them, I assume.
Absolutely.
What did you do?
Well, they take you to court, and they're required to hold a hearing within 10 days. But Virginia law bars defendants from bringing a witness in your defense unless you give that witness at least 15 days' notice. So by law, when you go in front of these civil asset forfeiture hearings, you are not allowed to bring witnesses to your defense.
Wow, that's tricky. Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you went by yourself?
And so every case, I actually had a lawyer with me, and we lost.
And who decides if you lose?
It's a judge in a general district court, which in Virginia is a court of no record.
Wow. I don't think that's even legal to do. So
I don't think it is.
Not
but
that they would care.
But they do it.
Yeah. So
not that they would care.
What happens if you demand a jury trial? They just laugh at you?
Well, you have to appeal it out of the general district court.
Okay.
And Virginia charges the defendant to appeal.
Okay.
And in my case, the judge ruled that I had to pay $5,000 in cash in 5 days to have a right to appeal.
Wow. This sounds worse than what we were told about the old Soviet Union courts and the way that they operate. I mean, I think really,
they probably studied them.
Yeah, it does sound worse. That's like so unbelievable that it would just leave people feeling like there's nothing they can do, which might be true.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Wow. So the way you described it was very accurate. They basically stole your animals with the help of the state.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that must have had a massive emotional impact on you as well as affecting your livelihood, I think. Because you were breeding...
Yes, it was a huge financial loss for me, but it was also just a tremendous emotional loss because those animals had been born in my home and had never known another owner. Yeah,
I mean, that would pretty much tend to drive you crazy, if you weren't careful. So I can totally imagine that. It could be like having your kids stolen. And they actually are stealing people's kids now, too. So it does make sense. Yes, they are. All right, so you had to find a way to deal with the emotional impact of that because you were just sitting there with very uncomfortable energy after that experience. And I would imagine
absolutely destroyed, yeah.
Yeah, so you turned that into motivation to do some proactive stuff, right?
Well, I felt it was up to me as the owner of my dogs to really get their story out so people could understand the truth of what happened to them. I mean, This is my way of making a legacy for them so that their lives were not in vain.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I like that. And just the one thing that you just did, and I'm sure you've done it elsewhere, which is just letting people know that there's a complete Gestapo fascist state operating in the U.S. right now every day. If people could actually grasp that that's true, that in itself would be a great service to, educate the public. But then beyond that, you thought of some ways to do it more completely, right? What did you do?
Well, through what happened to me, other people came out of the woodwork and started telling me their stories. And this is how I found out how the animal rights movement is attacking farmers and other pet owners and exotic animal owners and zoo owners. And this is how I got involved in all of this because all of these people came out of the woodwork to tell me their stories and tell me that the same thing is happening to them.
Wow. Well, listen, since that's an important part of it, just because people mostly would never believe that this stuff is going on in such a nice, government as the U.S., federal and local as well. If you want to share a few of those stories if you remember some of them and tell us what kind of things they told you?
I think another story that sort of really resonates with me that the average person has never heard of is a story out of Ohio. The Animal Rights Front had spent a lot of time trying to outlaw exotic animals. And when they do that, they outlaw huge sections of zoos besides private owners. And in fact, a lot of times zoos are private owners. And so they were not able to be successful in Ohio, and they were very unhappy about this.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they did is they ended up going in and creating a story in order to get this legislation passed. And what they ended up doing is they went in to Zanesville, Ohio, and they murdered an owner of exotic animals. He owned 18 Bengal tigers.
Mm-hmm.
And they went in there and they killed him. And they opened up all the cages, cut them open, and the law enforcement who was part of this effort went in there and shot all of the tigers. And they released it to the media, saying that this crazy man had killed himself, and that they were forced to kill all of these tigers because they were going on a rampage and they were going to threaten the safety of the people around them. And they didn't tell people that most of these animals were killed in their cages.
So in other words, they were saying that the guy, before killing himself, let all his tigers out to eat everybody?
Absolutely. He was.
Okay.
They were saying that he was suicidal and he was trying to get back at society, and so he let all of his tigers loose, when it was not true. I've actually read the autopsy results for this poor man, and there is no way that he killed himself in the way the government claims he died.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And as a result of this action, the legislation passed in Ohio. It is now illegal to own an exotic animal in Ohio. When they passed this legislation, they put no grandfather clause in the law. So now the Ohio Department of Agriculture is going around seizing everyone's animals and taking them away from them.
Wow. Wow. This is hard for the average person to grasp, I think, because they don't think in this kind of really malicious way. So it's hard to imagine that other people would.
Right.
Huh. Okay. Now, you mentioned something else on your website that I didn't realize was connected to the animal rights people. I thought it was just the insane state government of, I think, was Michigan. And you want to tell us about the color of pigs in Michigan and what that means?
Yes. The Michigan Department of Natural Resources issued a new regulation outlawing any pig that is not solid pink in color. Now, you might think, why is the Michigan Department of Natural Resources getting involved in farm animals when that is not their department? Right. But as we know, all government bureaucrats love to exceed their authority. And so they issued this declarative ruling that says if you own a pig that is not solid in color, it's not solid pink in color, you are a felon.
Okay, and most people would not follow your logic there. Why would you be a criminal if your pig is a different color?
Well, the crazy ruling that the DNR came up with, they decided that a pig that is not solid pink in color has a better chance of going feral if it managed to get loose from your farm.
Okay,
and
but
so
are they saying
that this was a danger?
Are they saying that you probably caught a feral pig and are trying to raise it?
No, actually, that's not what they were saying.
Okay.
They were saying that they needed to control the feral pig population. And if you as a private owner owned pigs that could potentially become feral, you are a problem.
Right. Okay, so it's like pre-crime for humans except applied to pigs.
Exactly.
Right. That pig might be thinking of escaping. So it's an obvious threat to society. So,
it might be.
Yeah.
And the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund has filed a class action lawsuit against the DNR on behalf of a number of farmers in Michigan.
Okay. Yeah, because, obviously a pig that is colored pink would never think of escaping. It has to be a different color. So did they actually get as far as enforcing this against farmers with different color pigs?
Yes, they have. They've gone after an Air Force veteran by the name of Mark Baker and claimed that he owns 70 illegal pigs.
Wow. This has amazing implications in a lot of directions. So is he the only farmer that they went after, or were there others as well?
There were a number of others, yes.
Okay, and were they saying that they have to kill all the pigs of the wrong color?
Yes, they do. And several farmers actually have complied and done that. But Mark Baker is leading the fight back, and he has said he's not going to comply. He is not going to kill his pigs, and he has the right to conduct his farm business the way he chooses. And if his pigs are not pink, so be it.
This is some kind of a racist program of the government against pigs, right?
You could look at it that way.
I mean, if it weren't so horrible, it would be funny. But basically, that's what they're saying. The pigs are divided into different races by what colors they are, and the ones with darker colors are obviously bad.
Exactly.
So amazing. What about some of the other individuals, that contacted you after your experience? Do you remember any of the other individual stories?
Another story that really resonates with me is of an elderly woman who owned an exotic bird breeding business. She was in Tennessee, and she had been an exotic bird breeder for 30 years, and this was her life's work. And like many of these stories, there's often a tragedy behind them. And she had come down with cancer, and she had asked people in her community to help her. And what happened is, of course, somebody reported her, and they targeted her, and they came in and they stole all of her birds. And they charged her with animal cruelty, and they claimed that she was being inhumane to these birds. Well, what happened is they shipped a number of them to Maryland. One of the people who had taken part in the raid was an owner of a reseller of birds in Maryland. And about a year and a half later, the authorities went into her home in Maryland, and they discovered a huge amount of animals in that home were dead.
Okay.
And so these animals were taken away from a successful business, a woman who had been in business for 30 years. They were taken supposedly because they were in poor care, but yet they were alive and well in her care. They get shipped north to Maryland to this bird rescue, and they get killed there.
Okay, so the bird rescue place was doing a bad job, right? They were letting them die.
The bird rescue place was doing a bad job, yes. They were in it for the money.
Okay. Yeah, what kind of birds, just out of curiosity, did she have that were exotic?
She had a number of them. I know she had parrots. I believe she also had conures.
Okay. All right. So she just basically was in a situation like yours where she just lost all of her animals. Right.
She lost everything. And when you think about it, if you've been in business for 30 years, you're now looking at your retirement years.
Right.
And the business that you've built up all these years is going to help you in your retirement. And when someone takes your business away from you, you now have nothing in retirement.
Yeah. This is the kind of thing that makes people who don't know this is a global problem want to leave the U.S. and go to some place where they're free to do what they want. But the problem is there's virtually nowhere else that's safe because it's not originating at the local level. So were you aware of, speaking of the non-local level, were you aware of what Agenda 21 was about during this period?
I was not aware in the beginning. It really took effect in the later years. Within the last couple of years, I really started putting all the pieces together and really discovering that animal rights activism is a plank of Agenda 21. And so that made me look into, what is this larger picture of what's going on here?
Yeah. Why don't you tell people what you think about that? Because what we've just done is finish a long discussion with Tom DeWeese about Agenda 2030, the newest version of Agenda 21. And now that you're talking about a specific application and how it's hurting people, tell me, what kind of picture did you put together on how these two levels relate to each other?
Well, the larger global level, all the way as it trickles down to the individual, is about power, money, and control. It's really about controlling and shaping society in a way that these global masters want it to go. And here in America, we have a history of liberty. The individual has the right to choose how they want to live their lives. And that is the heritage of our nation.
Right.
We don't need these global masters telling us how to live our lives because that is not America.
Right. Yeah, that legacy that you talked about is being carefully not taught anymore in most of the school system, and
absolutely.
In fact, that's kind of an end result of the federal government taking over the school system, which they're also prohibited from doing, just as much as these guilty until proven innocent proceedings are not legal in this country. So a lot of it comes down to how are you going to stop the government and its private partners from doing things that it already knows are illegal. I mean, that's kind of where we get to. And obviously that question hasn't been solved yet because it's still expanding.
No, it hasn't.
When did you start writing books about all this stuff?
Well, I really started basically the day after my raid occurred in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
I started writing what had happened to me almost immediately, and almost immediately the idea of writing a book about this occurred to me. And I sat down that day and just started writing as everything was happening to me, and I've been writing ever since.
Wow, that's great. So you didn't really know that you were an author before that, or were you already involved in writing of some other kind?
I had been writing since I was a teenager, but I was basically writing for magazines, writing for newsletters of local clubs and things like that, and it never really occurred to me to go into book writing until this time.
Okay. So what was the book that you wrote starting the day after the raid?
It's called Staring the Dragon in the Eye.
Okay. Well, why don't you take your time and tell us about that book, because it sounds like it would be really good for everybody to get.
Well, that book is about my dog's lives, and it goes through the lives of my poodles and how I got involved in poodles and the funny stories from their lives, which we always love to hear, funny stories about animals.
Right.
And then it goes all the way up to and including the day that they were stolen from me. And I really don't hold anything back when I'm telling their story. When I talk about the raid and what happened to them, I really talk about everything that happened to them and how they were abused by these people during the raid so that they could take pictures of abused animals. And I talk about how they forced me to watch them do this. And this was the hardest thing I'd ever lived through in my whole life. And so at the beginning, this book starts off with a lot of fun stories about these beautiful poodles. But unfortunately, it doesn't end well because I want the world to know what happened to them.
Yeah, it sounds like a difficult book to finish reading, huh?
It was difficult to write, believe me.
Yeah, I can hardly imagine it because I've had enough animals to know that, it's not out of the picture that you would try to die to protect them. And they didn't give you
absolutely.
any way to do anything to stop what was happening. That's what gets really bad about, government acting as a huge armed gang that you can't possibly stand up against in obvious ways.
That's right. I mean, people talk about how they would fight back if this happened to them.
Yeah,
but when you have somebody pointing a gun in your face,
no, I know.
The situation changes. You can't fight back against that.
Yeah, they're just not able to grasp the reality that, this happens with Second Amendment rights. People are saying, that they would never give up their guns, but it's already been happening to thousands of people. And they just come with a well-trained team with, heavily armed with lots of body armor, and it's by surprise, and you're not prepared. And
absolutely.
They did this in Katrina after the hurricane, and they just showed their true nature. They were throwing, elderly ladies down on the ground and, doing what they normally would do. I think they've got to find special people willing to do this sort of thing to serve that system.
Yeah, absolutely.
So writing the book, though, must have had a helpful influence in keeping you somewhat stable and sane, I would imagine, right?
Well, I definitely suffered from PTSD afterwards, and writing all of this helped me to get my pain out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you carry around something like that and never mention it, I think that would be really destructive from the inside. So
it is, and unfortunately, a lot of people who go through what I went through end up committing suicide afterwards.
Yeah, I can understand it. One of the real suicides, not one of the government staged ones. So absolutely. What kind of response did you get from the book?
It was very interesting because I had a lot of people who contacted me privately to tell me that the same sort of things were happening to them. Mm-hmm. But publicly, the animal rights activists were furious that I wrote this book about what they had done to me. And so publicly, they attacked me all over the internet, and they put a lot of fake reviews on Amazon about me, and they put a lot of stuff in there, a lot of allegations that I was this cruel, horrific person.
Right.
There's several reviews that claim that I'm mentally ill, and many other things to try and get people to not read about what happened.
That you were just pretending to be a normal person, right?
Absolutely, yep.
So, again, I mean, who are these people? I mean, who would want... This is really hard for, I would imagine, most normal people to grasp. If you wrote a book that was obviously sincere, you know, anybody who checked it out could verify that it's all true, and you have people furious and willing to lie and attack you to make believe it's all false, who are those people? I mean, where do they get people like that to be in that group?
Well, the truth is, all you have to do is follow the money. These people are making millions of dollars every year in doing what they're doing. Of course, they do not want to have somebody expose what they're doing.
Okay, so who's paying the millions of dollars to be wackos like that?
If you look at the animal rights movement, they are all incorporated as 501c3 charities. And if you look at all of their tax returns, this is $1 billion a year business. A lot of these campaigns are simply coming from average members of the public who donate money to these groups thinking that they're helping the animal.
Okay, yeah. People would think that, because I would imagine that their publicity material says that they're saving these animals from the worst torture conditions, right? And that by
Absolutely.
donating a little money, you're going to be saving the lives of all these great animals.
Right. The number one group in America today is called the Humane Society of the United States.
Okay.
They run a lot of advertising.
Mm-hmm.
They run a lot of commercials on TV that ask you to donate $19 a month to save various animals.
Yes.
And a lot of people in America today are not aware of the fact that the Humane Society of the United States does not operate any pet shelters. They do not operate a single one.
Okay, now...
But last year they took in...
Are there different names of the Humane Society? Is it in sections, or is it all one organization? Because I know there's one locally here that has their name on an animal shelter. I mean, is that the same or not?
Right. It's not the same. Every group is an individual entity.
Okay.
And so people have name confusion. They think when they donate to the Humane Society of the United States, they think they're donating to their local shelter, and they're not.
Okay.
And it's very common whenever you have somebody who wants to rip off somebody else, they take a name that's very similar to a reputable charity.
Okay.
So the Humane Society of the United States took in $133 million last year, but they do not operate any animal shelters at all.
Okay, and what's the good Humane Society called?
Well, you'd have to look at each one individually to determine if they're good or not, because everyone is incorporated individually.
Okay, so there might be a whole bunch of them then, right? There's not a big national Humane Society that's good.
There is not. There's thousands of them.
Okay. Yeah, ours might even be the Humane Society of our city, for all I know. I just, like everybody else, see the words Humane Society and think, oh, they're wonderful, then they deserve support.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And like any charitable giving, you should always investigate who you're giving your money to.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. So but the specific one that's called Humane Society of the United States, are they nationwide?
They operate as a Washington, D.C. lobbyist group, but they run advertisements nationwide.
Wow, that's interesting. No, I don't think anybody would ever guess that that's the name of a lobbyist group.
Right. A lot of people are confused, and unfortunately, they're giving them a lot of money thinking that it's going to their local shelters.
Yeah, that's really important, what you're letting people know, because I'll bet almost nobody really understood how that worked. So what are they lobbying for, by the way, since they're lobbying?
They are an animal rights group. They're lobbying to remove animals from our lives.
Okay. And since they, according to what you said, they obviously don't care at all about the welfare of animals. So what's their motive to get animals out of everyone's life? I mean, why would they care?
Because they make a lot of money.
Okay. So in other words, they just chose a cause that had good profit potential, and that's what they're doing.
Right.
It's not because of their
animals is
ethics. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I would say their ethics are probably questionable, but a lot of people get involved in animals because of the money.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, that's the reason people get in most businesses right now, because I've been in modern business school, and the new ethic is, as long as you don't, even if it's illegal, as long as you don't get caught, or as long as it is legal, it doesn't matter who's damaged. If you can make money, you're successful and you're a great business person. And
absolutely,
that's what's being taught to all the students. So
absolutely,
this is just an example.
The Humane Society of the United States was recently sued in the last couple of years via the RICO Act, and they lost. They had, amongst their other animal rights groups, had spent 10 years in court trying to prove that the Ringling Brothers Circus had abused their elephants.
I remember that. That was in the newspapers, too.
Yes. Well, the judge threw the whole lawsuit out after 10 years. He said, you haven't proven your case. And in fact, not only did you not prove your case, but Ringling was able to prove that they had paid off many of the witnesses. These witnesses were paid by the Animal Rights Front to claim that Ringling had abused their elephants. And so they lost. And so the Ringling Brothers Circus turned around and sued the Humane Society of the United States and a number of these other animal rights groups, and they won. They got $25 million from them.
Wow, great.
And so this was a tremendous win for the Ringling Brothers Circus. But then the Animal Rights Front turned around and used legislation to outlaw the training tools that they need for the elephants. And so, unfortunately, Ringling has announced that they are going to be getting rid of their elephants.
Wow. None of the real part of this story was told to the public, I'm pretty sure, because the only part that I remember seeing in the media many years ago was that Ringling Brothers had, implied that they had been caught mistreating the elephants. And this totally selfless nonprofit group was trying to, sue them to get it stopped, which anybody would support, right, if it was true. And I never heard the outcome of the case or that any of the other stuff you just said. I don't remember that coming out.
Well, that ruling was in 2009.
Yeah.
And as part of the RICO Act lawsuit, Ringling Brothers was able to prove that these groups had collectively raised $500 million off of the lawsuit, off of claiming that Ringling Brothers had abused elephants. So this is a very profitable industry for these animal rights activists.
Okay. All right. So even the lawsuit stuff, if you can use it to show how wonderful your group is and raise money that way, then it can be more profit, a lot more.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
All right. Wow, that's fascinating. And it's interesting to me that, unless I'm mistaken, the outcome showing that the lawsuit was false was not in the media. I don't remember it.
The media generally tends to not cover these things.
Yeah, they covered the part, though, where Ringling Brothers was accused, because I remember that part.
Absolutely. Well, abuse usually sells newspapers.
Yeah, exactly. And there may be more to it as well. But, okay, so that's basically what they've done is they've used money, the money motivation, to attract lots of people nationwide to work for this cause. And the ones that you're describing clearly know that they're being dishonest and they're not working for the cause that they're, showing to the public. And they don't mind. They just want to, get it done and collect the money.
That's right.
There's so many cases, throughout history, not just with, animal rights, but everything else where you get these really nasty leaders and rulers of different kinds, they would never be able to do the damage that they do to the public unless they were going to get thousands and thousands or sometimes millions of devoted workers to do their work for them. So you have this is an example. You've got the upper management of this Humane Society of the United States and whatever other similar groups there are like that, devising these really evil plans to make a business out of causing not just abuse to the animals, but their owners. And that would never get off the ground unless they could get lots of people to help them do it.
That's right.
So, just as a little side note, it comes down to the quality of character of the people in general society. Because if they're not willing to go along with things that are bad, a lot of them just won't happen. It's like the old thing that we used to hear in college in the 60s when I was there. What if they gave a war and nobody came? Did you ever hear that?
Yes, I have.
And it's the same thing exactly. What if they tried to start a fake animal rights organization and nobody would help? It wouldn't matter. It would never happen.
Well, that's right. It would never happen. Unfortunately, people, when you're talking about animals, they tend to believe the stories that they're told.
Right. But the workers within it who know the stories are wrong are happy to do it anyway.
Well, that's because they're making money.
That's amazing to me. That you don't see anything wrong with that picture making a lot of money by hurting other people and animals. I don't relate to it. But I know that's what goes on all the time.
Well, a lot of this can be traced back to the Walt Disney effect. A lot of people today don't have any firsthand experience with animals. Mm-hmm. And so when they see these things that the Animal Rights Front puts out, they believe it because they themselves have never touched an elephant. They have never touched a tiger. They don't know anything about these animals. Yeah. So they believe what they're told.
Well, now how could that transform them into people that would work for one of these organizations knowing the destruction they're causing?
Well, I think that really goes back to America's education system. The Animal Rights Front has been in America's education system for the past 30 years, teaching children their beliefs and teaching children that it's inhumane to own an animal, teaching children that it's inhumane to own an elephant, teaching children that meat is murder. They learn these things in school, and so when they're raised with this idea and they don't hear any other viewpoint, they believe it's true.
Yeah, that's true. The new education is really very different. All kinds of things are being taught to completely remove people from any form of common sense. In fact, it's specifically called unscientific or anti-science to have any normal opinion or any emotion. I was told in a PhD program in health sciences that if I wanted to be a good scientist, 2 basic requirements were no opinion and no emotion. So that, the teachers repeating this nonsense don't even know where it's coming from. It's coming from the bosses within the federal government who are using it for social engineering and to remove people from any of their innate knowledge of what's okay and not okay. And it's working pretty well.
That's right.
So after you wrote that book, I guess it was a little while before you wrote the next one, right? So what were you mostly doing with this after you wrote the first book?
Well, after the first book, like I said, so many people came out of the woodwork to tell me their stories that really is what led me to write my second book, because there isn't a good book that tells the average person on the street what is going on in America today. Mm-hmm. And so by gathering all these stories that people were telling me, that is what led me to write my second book, The Art of Terror.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty intense book. So what's that about, and how'd you get the title?
Well, because
and
it really is an art of terror. I also
noticed from the way the title's on the cover, it's got blood dripping off it in case people need to visualize what it looks like.
Well, it's not actually blood. It looks like it's blood, but the cover is meant to look like graffiti.
Okay.
And that's one thing that the Animal Rights Front likes to do, is they like to spray paint graffiti on things. They spray paint it on buildings. They spray paint it on people's personal homes. And so the cover of the book is really a takeoff of the graffiti that the Animal Rights Front likes to do. And it's really a compilation of stories that, by and large, only took place within the last 3 or 4 years. That was what I focused on, what is happening right here and right now in America. Mm-hmm. And it's stories of individual people and how their lives have been destroyed by the Animal Rights Front.
Okay, so are these like some of the people that responded to your first book that you put into this one, or where did you get these people and who are they?
Well, it's some of the people that responded to my first book, but it's also other people in other industries. I was really fortunate after what happened to me is that people from other industries really opened their homes and their hearts to me. And so I was able to go visit exotic animal farms, and I was able to go visit zoos and get behind-the-scenes tours, and I was able to go to various farms and see how the farmers raise their animals. And so all of these stories encompass all of America, from our farmers that produce our food to the people who own our zoos and circuses.
Okay, well, if you don't mind, it would be fun to hear some of those specifics if you remember a few.
Well, a number of the specifics I've already talked about on the show, like the woman who owns the parrot breeding business.
Right.
And there's a number of other ones. I talk a lot about America's farmers in this book, and I talk about a law that passed in California called Proposition 2. It was a ballot initiative that was supposed to provide more breeding room for chickens. And this law passed, but it had no guts to it. It basically said, the farmers are supposed to make more room for the chickens. Mm-hmm. And it really didn't give any specifics of how a farmer was supposed to be able to comply with this law. And as a result, none of them could. And the only way that they could come into compliance with this law was to kill half their chickens, which is, what the Animal Rights Front wants, but it's not what the farmers wanted. I mean, they lost 50% of their business overnight.
Right.
And then after that, the California legislature passed additional legislation that made the California law apply to all 50 states.
That's very hard to understand. How could they do that?
Well, you have to look at the corruption of America's court system. I mean, California farmers sued repeatedly to try and overturn this law, and they couldn't. And then after that, you had a class action lawsuit among 6 different states that sued the state of California in federal court over this law, and they lost. Now, you think under our Constitution, this is not legal.
Yeah, again, this is the kind of thing that we were told happens in communist countries, but not in our country because we're totally free here.
Right, absolutely.
What about the deal with zoos? What kind of thing was going on with them?
Well, there's some different ways that zoos are being affected today. One is through legislation. There's legislation that outlaws various classes of animals, and so zoos are no longer allowed to own them and show them to the public. There's also direct attacks by animal rights activists. There's some states like North Carolina that allows private groups to go in and become law enforcement. And so in North Carolina, PETA has gone after a zoo there because it didn't like the length of the nails on a giraffe.
Oh.
And so you have stories like that. I'm not exactly sure that there's anyone within PETA that knows how long a giraffe's toenails are supposed to be, but they claimed they knew.
Okay.
And then you also have a fallout of another industry, and that is in America, we have the Animal Rights Front in the last couple of years has been successful in outlawing horse slaughter. And this is a feel-good issue that a lot of people really don't understand, and that is there are many states and many areas in the United States where it is now illegal to bury a horse. So if your horse dies, you can't get rid of the body. And rendering plants were one way that you could get rid of this body. So these animals used to be fed to the zoos, and now it is illegal. And so that means the price of the feed has gone up for all of the zoos. And some of the zoos can absorb those costs, and they raise their admission prices. Other zoos can't, and so they go out of business.
Wow, interesting. So there's a lot of different industries that they actually target, right?
Right.
So,
and it's all interconnected. When one industry gets hit really hard, it really affects all the other ones as well. Okay.
So did you get the same sort of feedback on this book as the last one, or was it different, or what happened after you released it?
I got a little bit more positive feedback after this book. I got a lot more people coming out of the woodwork. I've had people as far away as Europe and New Zealand who've contacted me to tell me that they've gone through the same things that I talked about in the book. I also still have a few more attacks from the animal rights people, which is to be expected.
Yeah.
And I kind of view that as a compliment. But I have had much more positive feedback on this book.
Yeah, good. So after that, you had another book. I think you've done 3 on this general topic, right?
Yes. My third book was just released in the last 2 months, and it is an expose of the single county that I lived in, which was the headquarters of animal rights activism and environmentalism in Virginia. So this book really covers the stories of other people just like me in the same county who were targeted by the same people.
Wow. All right. So it sounds like all of them would be, very emotionally involving to read. These are not just
absolutely
not just a collection of facts. These are stories that the reader would really get personally into. Sounds like.
Well, I like to focus on human interest stories because that really shows how these policies are affecting us.
So, all right. Again, we were talking about Agenda 21 before. How much do you see this coming down from, a very high level orchestration versus just a group like this Humane Society of the United States figuring out a way to make money if they don't mind causing all this damage?
Well, all of these policies are part of Agenda 21, so it's all coming down from there.
Okay. So the groups are getting encouragement and ideas from higher level social designers, you might say.
Absolutely. I mean, we have Maurice Strong, who is one of the authors of Agenda 21, is also on the board of directors of the Humane Society of the United States.
Wow, that's interesting. Huh. So, what are they? Are you in touch with what they're doing now? I mean, what are some of their activities that are going on at the moment that they're asking everyone for donations to support?
Well, there's a lot of activities. I mean, there's something going on every single day, so it's really hard to get a grasp of what is going on. I know we've had a number of natural disasters. Recently, we've had some flooding in South Carolina. We also have had wildfires out in the West, out in California. And when disasters like this happen, you have groups like the Humane Society of the United States who will fly into those areas. And if they can find some animals, they will slap their T-shirts on the people that are helping with those animals, and they will take video footage. They have professional film crews that go with them. Wow. And they will take video footage of this so that they can put it out in the media that they need money. And, of course, they ask for the money to go to them. And people don't realize that they don't have an animal shelter. They are not the ones that are actually helping that animal.
Right. So you said they were getting, more than $100 million in a year or something like that? It's a huge organization.
$133 million.
Well, it's not so much a huge organization. It's just a huge business. It sounds like it's run by less people than you might imagine, right, with that size of operation. It's
just a small group operating out of a Washington, D.C. office, and they have a small office complex in Maryland.
Okay, so they've got that should really help the profit margin to not actually be doing very much.
That's right.
So, wow. So I'm just trying to get a picture of how they operate. They're actually, you see these reports of different charities or nonprofits. This one gives X amount of money to what they actually say they're working on. Some of them, especially a lot of the health charities are notorious for taking almost all the money for themselves and putting a little bit toward what they say their mission is. But these guys, it sounds like they'd be putting almost nothing toward what they say they're collecting for. You think that's accurate?
That's right. There's actually a group out there. They're called Humane Watch. You can look for their website on the internet. It's called humanewatch.org.
Okay.
They are focused on exposing the Humane Society of the United States. And they crunch their tax returns every year. And they have proved over the last 5 years that the Humane Society has given less than half of 1% of the money they receive actually to animals.
That's what I was kind of getting at. Yeah, from not doing any actual projects like that and having almost nobody that is under them doing it. I mean, you would think they're basically keeping almost all the money, except for
almost all the money,
except for what they use for PR, of course, which takes a little bit.
Right.
So that's
they usually send about $25 million to the Cayman Islands to their retirement hedge funds every year.
Okay. Well, they're just being frugal, right? So
that's right.
So they're probably assuming that almost nobody has heard of Humane Watch, which unfortunately they're right. They're correct.
That's true.
And so that would be a really good one to give a lot of exposure to, wouldn't it?
I recommend people check it out. They post articles about the Humane Society regularly.
Right, and since percentage-wise of the population, almost nobody's even knowing they're existing. So maybe somebody there should be a guest on our radio show.
That would be a good idea.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that. Okay, so what happened from the response to your third book? What was it?
The third book has only come out recently.
Mm-hmm.
The response so far has been almost 100% positive. There's been a few people that have sort of squeaked, and if you can read the reviews on Amazon, they're almost funny. Some of these people have come out and said that I'm childish and I can't spell, and I'm just a gossip monger, and I take pride in those reviews. I think it's wonderful they took the time to say those things about me. That tells me I made a difference.
Yeah, it's almost like, it reminds me of what I call the government seal of approval program that we're really appreciative for, and that, generally when they come out in concert with the medical industry and tell you what to do or not to do, it's pretty reliable. If you reverse it, it's almost always accurate. So it sounds sounds like it's similar with your negative reviewers. Definitely a good sign.
I hope I get more of them.
Yeah. Well, we can certainly, request that a lot more people complain and see if that happens. But so, okay, I guess the bottom line is, what's the state of dog breeding? And I assume it's mostly with dogs, not cats or other animals that they're attacking, right? I mean, dogs.
With dog breeding, the sad fact is that since 2005, more dogs die every year than are born. They have had such a tremendous impact against the pet breeding industry in America that people are not aware that we are losing some of our dog breeds in America. They're becoming close to extinct.
Yeah, no, I don't think anybody's aware of that. And, one of the biggest arguments, that all the breeders are terrible is that look how many animals are getting killed in the shelters, right? And it's because
that's right.
The breeders are going crazy and breeding millions of animals that shouldn't be bred.
And what people don't know is that I've heard that over and over again, and people don't understand that those shelter numbers that they keep hearing are from 30 years ago. Most of the shelters in America today are empty. They are so empty that animal rescues in America are importing over 300,000 foreign dogs every year and bringing them into the United States to fill up their shelters and their rescues to give people something to buy because they're out of product.
Wow, I never heard about that before. I doubt that anyone else did either. That's interesting.
Well, a lot of people are not aware, and unfortunately, they're bringing diseases with them when they come into this country. We had a tremendous outbreak of canine flu this year that killed over 1,000 American dogs, and that flu was brought into the United States with animal rescue shipments from Asia.
Wow, no, just the idea that they would have to have dogs from Asia to rescue is hard to even grasp. Because
well, the thing is, they don't have dogs to rescue. We have an unfortunate problem that rescues are promoted so much in America today that breeders in foreign countries are raising dogs to ship them to America to be sold as rescues.
Wow. That's a really strange idea. So, wow.
It is a very strange idea.
Yeah, I guess there's money to support that part of the industry, though. So they have figured out a niche.
Absolutely. They have figured out a niche. And if you look at any of the newspapers in the last month, there's been a number of shipments of purebred golden retrievers from Turkey that have come into the United States, to different states. And there are no homeless golden retrievers in Turkey. It's all a scam. They've been deliberately bred for the American rescue trade.
Wow. Wow. This is really amazing education, I think. And does anything like this happen with cats, or is it almost all just dogs?
It's mostly dogs. The whole art of having a purebred cat has really disappeared. It used to be that people owned purebred cats, but that whole industry has collapsed, and there are very few purebred cat breeders anymore. Okay. And so there's plenty of, just your average domestic short-hair cat in the local shelters. So cats are not a problem. Yeah. However, there are some states, like the state of Maine, that is out of cats, and there are rescues in Maine that are shipping in truckloads of cats.
Well, I guess that's good for the other cats that have to be rescued, right?
I guess so.
They've got more places to go. But it sounds like the real target and problem with the whole attacks from the animal rights people are on dogs primarily. I mean, that's the biggest victim, right?
It is on dogs. It is on dogs primarily, but it also affects a lot of other pets. We talked previously about the dollar height rabbitry in Missouri. They were raising rabbits on a very small scale. It was just one family raising a few rabbits.
Right.
And they were selling them for meat, which some people do eat rabbit meat.
Right.
And the USDA went after this family.
Okay.
Right. And the USDA went after this family and tried to claim that they made an illegal $200 profit. And because of this $200 profit, they tried to fine this family $3.9 million.
Yeah, I guess, a lot of terrorists got their start raising rabbits, too. So they're probably trying to stop that. Yeah.
We got to stop Bunny Team 6, that's right.
Yeah. So what ended up happening with that?
Well, the Dollar Heights simply told the USDA that they were not going to comply. And the USDA kept sending them letters and saying, we're going to fine you and we're going to do all these horrible things to you. And the family stood up and said, no, I'm an American. I'm not going to comply. And they went to the media, and they were very lucky that they were able to get a lot of positive media about what was going on with them. And they were able to attract the attention of Senator Rand Paul, who invited them out to Capitol Hill, and he had them testify on what was happening to them before Congress, before a congressional committee. And so they were able to get their story out. And they just simply told the USDA over and over again that they were not going to comply. And the USDA said, fine, we'll settle the case if you give us $90,000.
Oh, how generous.
And Dollar Heights said, it was very generous of them. They said, well, in fact, take a credit card if you want to give us a credit card.
Right.
And the Dollar Heights said, no, I will not comply. And ultimately, the USDA was forced to drop the case.
I think that it's too bad with an outcome like that, because the USDA, some of the people in it should have been indicted for doing things under color of law that they're not authorized to do, because people don't think this far in general, but the federal government can't legally delegate power to any agency that they don't have. And everybody thinks this is just impractical nowadays and that it doesn't matter anymore. But in reality, the federal government can only do a few things that are specifically enumerated in the Constitution. And it says they can't do anything else, and they just ignore it, including everybody in Congress. No one, including Rand Paul that I know of, brings that up. And I'm just wondering why. I mean, is there a threat out that anybody in Congress that mentions that is going to get killed, or what's the reason they won't talk about it? It's so obvious. I mean...
Well, I think a lot of people in politics are also involved in it for money and power.
Yeah, probably most of them. But I just, wish that eventually somebody would get in there that is like, that has a more normal and heroic personality that is just there to tell the truth. That would be really unusual.
It would be.
I mean, I don't know what would happen if somebody publicly brought up the fact that the federal government's powers are listed and restricted to having to be on that list, and anything that's not, they can't delegate. So, for example, they can't help any of these other agencies at all. No one will mention that so far. So, I don't know. Anyway.
Well, we need more people who listen to your show to speak up.
Well, we're trying. We are getting big faster, so there are people that that care about these things. We just got, about 7 billion more to reach so far, but we're working on it. But I want to really try to spread awareness of what you're doing, because I think it's great, and it's part of real education and what's done in the educational system, which the government is also specifically prohibited from having any connection to in this country, because it's not on that list. That's not education. That's brainwashing and making people unable to think, as, exemplified by the fact that I told you that PhD science class was telling you, now remember, no emotion and no opinion if you want to be a real scientist. And otherwise you're anti-science, which is like, going against the religion of the country. So there's a few things that need improving, but what's your current, project profile like? What are you working on? What are you hoping to accomplish next? And, what's going on?
Well, I'm speaking out in promotion of my recent book that I've put out, and I'm doing a lot of speeches before libertarian and constitutional groups across America.
Good.
But I'm also working on a next book project.
And if people would like to support what you're doing, besides buying and reading all of your books and telling everybody else to do that, what ways can they help you that you would most like them to do?
Well, I'd like to see more people in America speak out about what is going on. Support your local animal businesses. Get to know them. Get to know the people who own your local petting zoo. Get to know the people that own your local zoo. Get to know the pet breeders in your industry or in your city or in your town. Get to know the farmers in your area and find out what is affecting them and see what you can do to help them. Okay.
There seems to be a theme here of not being isolated from your community, not thinking of just what you need to be okay, as if you're totally not connected to anybody else, but start becoming aware of the other people that make up the community, and especially ones that are running important businesses and or parts of the government, right?
That's right. Today's social media has given us such a scope of getting information about other people, but it's also isolated us from the people that live around us. And so I ask people to reach out to your neighbors and get to know the people that are in your community. And you'll find out that you're surrounded by amazing people and people that are going through struggles that you have no idea what they're going through, and they need your help. Yeah,
absolutely right. And, it's easy to start thinking, when you get aware of the problems that we've been talking about, that society is just mostly these totally insane, malicious people. But that's not really accurate. It's just that, remember when there was a big political thing going on where they tried to make, I think, the Republican Party, and I consider both parties criminal organizations, but the Republican Party at that time was trying to push this idea of the silent majority, and they were right. The silent, majority of the people are actually normal, basically good people who all are concerned about the same things. And so you're just trying to say they should get in touch with each other.
That's right. And America's animal owners, by and large, the vast majority of us, we're good people who are trying to do the right thing.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure that's right, because if you're a somewhat normal person and you're living with an animal, it's not going to take very long, probably a few seconds, for you to become aware that's not a thing. That's a living creature that actually has thoughts and emotions and real depth of personality. And you if you have somewhat normal mental and emotional health, you don't want to cause pain to it.
Well, that's right. People want to do the right thing. But money also influences people. As much as we don't like to think about it, money does influence people. And when you own an animal business, the better care that you take of your animals, the more money that you make. You don't make any money by not treating your animals well.
Yeah,
so people have a vested self-interest in treating their animals well.
Yeah, exactly, because they're going to be in a lot better condition and worth more. So
that's right.
All right. Well, I think your advice to become aware of the organizations and the people in your community, and like the owners of the zoos and the farms and the vet hospitals and, the pet shops and whatever other things are connected to the animals or other activities like that, is a really good idea. And if you're not, connected to the physical people and businesses around you, you're likely to believe anything you see on television or in the newspaper, which would be unfortunate because most of it's not true. And I agree with your point too that, in spite of the really potentially great things that the internet has allowed to have happen, there has to be a balance too, because I see people walking around the street totally oblivious to where they might be. I mean, walking into things occasionally just because they're totally meditating on their whatever's on the iPad. And
that's right.
It might be good to look at the outside world and the other people once in a while. Just to remember.
You're missing a whole lot when you don't look at the world around you.
Yeah, the real world is actually still there in spite of the electronics.
That's right.
So.
And it's better than the electronic world.
Yeah, I don't really agree with that. No matter how accurate they get the virtual reality to seem, it's actually not alive. So
that's right.
Okay. Well, so did you get to go over everything that you need people to know about, or did we miss anything in the last minute or so here?
I think we've pretty much covered a lot.
Yeah, that was the point. So that's good. Okay, and people can they communicate with you? Is that possible?
Absolutely. I have a Twitter account. You can tweet me. You can reach me through Facebook. I have a Facebook account, or you can reach me through my website, which is KatharineDokken.com.
Okay, great. And do they need your addresses on Twitter or Facebook?
My website has links to my Twitter account, so you can just click on the link and I'll send you right there.
Okay, that sounds great. So thanks for your patience with such a long discussion, and I really appreciate it. It's unique information, and I'd really like to help get it out to more people, so we'll do our best on that. So,
all right, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, Katharine, thanks for being here. So I hope you learned a lot from Katharine. I definitely did. I thought I was pretty well, aware and educated on areas of Agenda 21, but she brought up a lot of particular points and whole arenas that I had no idea were going on. As far as animal rights, for example, is concerned, I had heard a few things about them trying to liberate the chickens by burning down chicken houses and things like that of somewhat questionable logic and motivation, but I had no idea that they were organized in the ways that Katharine has just been telling us, and I'm still digesting what I learned from her. And I was thinking that this one organization, what did she call it? Humane Society of the United States, needs a lot more exposure, and we need to help them get that, because it sounds like they're behind a lot of the kind of terrorism that is actually going on in this country in the name of animal rights and what happened to Katharine. She also mentioned another group. Maybe it was, I don't remember if it was on or off the air. I could have missed it, but there's this one group that she mentioned called Humane Watch. And Humane Watch is keeping track as well as they can and trying to tell the public about what the Humane Society of the United States and similar groups are actually doing, the opposite of what they say they're doing. but I never heard of them. So I'm sure even though they are trying to get the information out, they need some more help. So we'll try to get one of them, a good representative from Humane Watch, on the show as soon as we can. We want to start working on that now. We did mention, and we've only got a very few minutes here left, we did mention that we're moving to another network, which is Mike Adams' new network called talknetwork.com. You can find that on the internet now. And if you want to help keep us on the air, which I would appreciate, because I think this project is doing some good and doing some good education, getting information and people out to the public that they need to know about. There's two ways you can support us. One is go to richard.talknetwork.com when you buy things at the large store that's connected with Mike's operation at Natural News and all the other projects that he's got going. And I've known Mike for quite a while. He's an amazing person. So there's a lot at that store. And if you want to buy anything that's there, if you'll remind yourself to go through richard.talknetwork.com, we'll get a few dollars when you do that. And it goes toward keeping us on the air. It probably won't be enough, but there's also a donate button on our website, which is lostartsradio.com, which, not if you're struggling to pay bills, but if you've got money and you're fairly comfortable and able to help us that way, I'd appreciate it if you do. It'll keep us here longer, because this is it turned out to be a much bigger operation than we had any idea of when we were invited to first do it. So my compliments and good report on blogtalkradio.com. We've had excellent experience with them. We're not leaving because of anything negative. It's just that we're invited to participate in Mike's launch of this new network. So I hope you'll come and listen to us there. That's on previews, or not previews, debuts, I should say, on the 14th day of November. 1 hour earlier than you're used to hearing us here. You can come and join us for that first show. I think you'll like it. It's going to be pretty amazing. I'm not ready to release the topic quite yet, but it's one that we've been planning for months, and it's going to be pretty worthwhile. So please come. And then, let's see, there are a couple of other things I wanted to just mention. One is that, remember, we started as a health show. Well, that was the reason I was invited originally to do the radio show, is because I've been a independent holistic health scientist since 1965. I really haven't gotten into too much of my own information from my research and my experimentation and study yet, but that is coming. And the reason that we're covering all these other apparently diverse issues that you might not immediately recognize as health related is really in spite of the fact that they are health related. And I realized that freedom, for example, strong economic foundations of society, not having all your money stolen by the central bank system, not having the government involved in various crimes, these have a direct impact on your personal health. And that's why we're covering them. And in fact, there's not too many issues that are not related to health in some way. So we're just going to continue to bring you areas of education, meeting the people that you might not hear about otherwise. And I will probably find some way to start talking a little bit more about important information that I was able to come up with in the last few decades, specifically about reversing degenerative disease and reversing what is commonly known as aging, both of which I found to be completely unnatural, avoidable, and not necessary. We just have to be really careful because we don't have freedom of speech in the country that we're currently broadcasting from. You might have heard of it. It's called the United States. And it used to have those things, but not anymore. So if we talk about those things specifically, we'll have to do it in a way that it's clear we're not doing anything forbidden or giving medical advice, etc. But we'll figure that out. So in the meantime, have a great night. Happy Halloween, in spite of the fact that that's not acceptable to say anymore. And I hope you have a wonderful week. And come and join us on talknetwork.com. We'll be looking for you there on the 14th of November. Have a good night. Talk to you later. Bye.